Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mark Rogers TV Voice of College Football Show. It's a Wednesday night. We've got the live stream going at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We are previewing Week 6 of college football. We will take your calls at 860-325-3687. 860-325-3687. I have sent out a link to my media guests that you see on a weekly basis here. 107. We had 107 guests on in 2017 here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So we talked to the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry. And instead of trying to schedule those specifically, I am sending the link out. I am blasting the link on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook and hoping that they respond. It's all been explained to them. So hopefully many of the media guests that you have requested and suggested will find the link and come on. Otherwise, we talk to you and we talk Week 6 of college football. If you enjoy the audio or know of anyone who may not necessarily have the time, the patience, or wants to look at me, you can go to the audio on Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher and just search Mark Rogers TV and you get the same content that you get right here. If I'm doing my job, basically you won't quite get the same content because I don't necessarily turn around all the audio. That's the goal, to get all the audio from these videos on YouTube turned around for the audio podcast. So we will welcome in the live chat, of course, and remind everyone that you can support Mark Rogers TV by going to Amazon and doing your regular Amazon shopping by using the links in the description section of any of the videos. If you go to any of the videos, go to the description section, and you will see that there are links from Amazon there. Take any of those links and enter Amazon using those links, and you support Mark Rogers TV. And, of course, we've got our newsletter, aptly named The Voice of College Football, and that comes out every Monday. So if you would like to join the mailing list, get your newsletter. I'm not going to clutter your inbox with a bunch of garbage. What you're going to get is a newsletter each and every week that is packed with college football opinion, perspective, and information. Talk to anybody on the chat that gets the newsletter. I think they'll vouch for me. I think so. You can get the newsletter again by sending your email to MarkRogersTV at Gmail. MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Send your email right there. All right, we've got a live stream tonight for as long as you want the live stream to go. We've got a live stream coming up tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time as well. We will have media guests if they can follow instructions. Last week, we had probably about 60 or 70 media on our contact list, and about 3 or 4 joined. And that's fine, because we'll talk to you and we'll talk Week 6. If you have any suggestions, any requests, special requests of media that you would like to see, I will tweet them. I will contact them tonight as we speak on the air, and we'll get them on. Otherwise, the phone lines are open at 860-325-3687. Let's go to the live chat. Of course, for Week 6 here, Alabama goes to Arkansas. We've got Texas, Oklahoma in the Red River Shootout. Why it's no longer the rivalry, I have no idea, but the Red River Shootout of Oklahoma and Texas. Maryland travels to Michigan. Remember, the Terps have not lost in the Big Ten. They're 1-0, and they're 3-1 overall. Northwestern at Michigan State. Mizzou at South Carolina. We've got BC possibly missing A.J. Dillon at North Carolina State. Clemson at Wake. LSU at Florida. Florida State at Miami. Kentucky going to Texas A&M. We've got Wisconsin hosting Nebraska. Notre Dame at Virginia Tech at night in Blacksburg, and Utah and Stanford getting it on. So those are some of the big games for Week 6 in college football. Of course, we're going to see what you guys have on the live chat, and we invite you in to talk college football. We talk it up like nobody else. Best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation, but we don't necessarily need them. We've got you, we've got me, and we talk it up here each and every day. Since Sunday, I've released my top 25 that makes sense. Also, I've released my bottom 10. Had some fun with that. It's not necessarily the 10 worst teams in the country. Call it the most embarrassing teams and situations in college football, the bottom 10. And then also on SG1 Sports, they've asked me to preview and predict a number of games throughout the season. And so last week it was Penn State, Ohio State, also Notre Dame and Stanford. This week I've released a video of Notre Dame and Virginia Tech on SG1 Sports. So just slide over to SG1 Sports at some point and check out my preview and prediction on Notre Dame and Virginia Tech. They've asked me to do Oklahoma and Texas. Also, LSU and Florida are coming. We will always provide our best analysis right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So please like, comment, and subscribe. As George says all the time, let's say I've got 500 views on a live stream. I should have 500 likes. And even if you don't like it, if you enjoy the conversation, if you enjoy the debate, if you enjoy the live chat, even if you disagree with me, support what we're doing here. And like, comment, and subscribe. And yes, we have a winner of our contest. If you didn't hear the other night, the contest of who would be voted number 1 and number 2, which schools would receive the 2 top votes. That was, hey, this is perfect timing here because we've got Cam Underwood on the line from State of the U, who caught my message there. So I appreciate that. Cam, I'll let you know. How you doing tonight, first of all?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. So I appreciate you catching on to the new format here. I think you can understand the headache of scheduling like 7 people at the same time on a Wednesday night, for example. And you're all set with a 8 o'clock time slot open, and then somebody else wants 8:30, and you got to see if the 8:30 guy will slide to 8 and all that business. So we're on here for as long as you want to stay on, Cam. But I was pointing out to everyone, so from September 15th until October 1st, I was running a contest, and the 2 teams that were named the most, they got their helmets purchased. So I've got to make a helmet purchase, and I asked people, what 2 schools do you want to see? And Oklahoma finished number 2.
Okay.
And the U finished number 1.
Yeah,
so we'll get the U up there next.
Oh,
so
yeah.
in Oklahoma for sure, and I'll probably buy some more. Okay. All right, man. It's Florida State week, Cam.
Indeed, it is.
And I know you don't care about the point spread. You want to come out of there with a 50-point win, a 1-point win, whatever it takes. But I heard like 13 today. So it's a pretty healthy point spread based mostly on what's happened at Florida State, although they finally got a win in the ACC last week. Let's go back to the North Carolina game because obviously that's the big debut in terms of a starting spot for Mr. N'Kosi Perry. So this has been the long-awaited date that
yeah, I'm over here dancing and things. Yeah.
All right, Cam, your analysis of Mr. Perry's performance.
I mean, I think you've got to go back to the FIU game before. Mark Richt said that the plan always was to play N'Kosi Perry starting in the third series against FIU and then see how things went. And then Miami scored touchdowns on his first 2 drives. And then he effectively Wally pipped Malik Rozier at that point. Wally Pipp, if you guys don't know that story, he had the longest baseball consecutive games played streak. And he took a day off for being sick, or his wife was giving birth to a baby or something like that for the Yankees way back when. And the guy who replaced him that day was Lou Gehrig. And Lou Gehrig never came out of the lineup again. So Wally Pipp is a thing where, you know, your job was there one day and literally gone the next. And that literally happened to Malik Rozier. Mark Richt, he spoke very highly of N'Kosi Perry from the FIU game, and he played very well in that game and showed the kind of talent that I've been talking about N'Kosi Perry having had for years. 2015, he was a freshman in 17 at Miami. So, 2015, 6A Player of the Year in the state of Florida. He was runner-up for 6A Player of the Year and like a quarterfinalist for Mr. Football in the state of Florida as a senior in 2016. Shattered records set by Dante Culpepper at his high school Ocala Vanguard. 6'4", he can throw the ball a country mile, he can run, but he doesn't really look to run. If you can tell, even from the FIU game when he was scrambling around and threw that lob touchdown to Lawrence Cager, N'Kosi Perry wants to run or move around to throw the ball. But if you give him a lane, he can take it. So yeah, he really just has all the talent in the world. He finally ascended to the starting quarterback job, and he did really well. Obviously, against North Carolina, the numbers are not going to be eye-popping, especially since the defense got 6 turnovers and the defense scored 3 of them themselves with return touchdowns. So Miami only ran 46 plays of offense. They only threw the ball 12 times. I think it was 14 called passes total because there were 2 sacks in there. So, out of 46 plays, you have 14 pass plays. 12 of them were actual throws. One of them was an interception, but Mark Richt came out pretty emphatically and said that he thought that the receiver was interfered with on the ball down the seam route or post, whatever you want to call it, down the middle, that ended up getting tipped around and intercepted. So, N'Kosi Perry, he got the team in and out of the huddle really well. He did all the operational things that Malik Rozier was getting praised for, of, changing the protection and checking to a run play or checking to a pass play and things like that. But, his arm talent is incredible, especially as compared to Malik Rozier. His accuracy is impeccable. That touchdown to Darrell Langham on that little hide-and-go-seek double move route, you couldn't put it on a dime any better than that. So, yeah, N'Kosi Perry has great talent, and he's finally grown up, and he's showing that on the field. And I think that Miami's offense is going to maintain its, top 20 explosiveness, but then increase the efficiency. And that is going to make it even more explosive because you're not playing behind the stick so much. You're not really, struggling to convert things or to hit your markers of, okay, first down, I need to get 5 or more. Second down, I need to, do whatever, landmark kind of a thing. I think in the North Carolina game, Miami only had 4 or 5 third downs because, we're getting first downs on first and second down, which is fine. I don't need to get to the third down before I convert, get a new set of downs. So, yeah, I'm very pleased to see N'Kosi Perry finally on the field. I'm really pleased to be validated for all the things that I've said and written over the last couple of years because, when you get 2 or 3 years down the road from, writing about N'Kosi Perry as a high school junior and then high school senior, and then he doesn't play his redshirt year, and then it's, getting into this year and, okay, he's suspended for the opener, he's not really playing in these other games, trumpeting the same thing. And I really believe what I've said, it kind of does get to be old. But yeah, I'm really excited to see him. I'm really excited to see the efficiency increase on the offense with the same or even better kind of explosiveness. And I think that can be a transformational move for Miami at quarterback. So, I thank Malik Rozier for the time that he spent as a stopgap, but I'm glad that gap was stopped and we turned it over to a player with better talent so we can move on and forward. So yeah, I'm really pleased with N'Kosi Perry finally stepping up.
The stopgap was stopped. So that gap was stopped.
Exactly.
Very well put. We've got Cam Underwood on the line from State of the U. You can join him and the rest of the crew right there at stateoftheu.com, covering Miami sports, Miami football, of course, front and center, especially on this week with Florida State lined up at home on Saturday afternoon. You have the pulse of the fan base. You are a fan alumni and also cover the team. You've got all the boxes checked to a certain extent. Besides the obvious ecstasy of the fan base, 90 some odd % of them being pleased with the decision to go with Perry, are there any specific things that are being said out there that would pinpoint a little bit more specifically, the euphoria of, hey, we finally got our guy on the field and we can finally maybe cut loose and see what this team's capable of doing on offense more consistently?
No, I just think that it's really that. I can't think of any one person who said any one specific salient thing. But yeah, it's really just, being it. You don't kind of realize what you have until it's gone kind of a thing, but in a negative-ish way. Because when N'Kosi, he ran around, he had a 40-something yard pass to Mike Harley that if it was a little bit more accurate, Harley would have scored. But on the play where he's running around for that pass, Malik Rozier wouldn't even thrown that ball. He wouldn't even come to that third or fourth read. But then you see that and you're like, oh, wait, I didn't know that existed. I never had sushi in my life until my college girlfriend when I was 21. And I'm like, oh, it's raw fish or it's eel or blah, blah, blah. And then I had it. I was like, wait, whoa, I've been missing. I didn't know that this existed. And I think that kind of a thing, that discovery is what we're seeing with N'Kosi Perry being out there. So yeah, just really pleased with that. But, I know that obviously the quarterback position is the most important position on the team, but, don't overlook all the other guys. Jeff Thomas is looking like an all-American wide receiver. Brevin Jordan, even though I know his numbers aren't really great, but as he looks like the next great tight end from the University of Miami. The offensive line has struggled, but they also look like they're stepping up because Miami's run for more than 200 yards in consecutive weeks. The running back stable is amazing. The defensive line is one of the best in America. And I know that obviously you have guys, teams like Clemson, teams like LSU, teams like Clemson, Alabama, Clemson, LSU, teams like that, who is the defensive lines that everybody knows about. Dude, go look at the numbers, because Miami, by the numbers, is good as or better than all of those. I mean, Gerald Willis coming back, and he's playing really well. Shaq Quarterman just doing Shaq Quarterman things. Michael Pinckney doing Michael Pinckney things. Jaquan Johnson looks like a first-team All-American. Michael Jackson out there. I mean, there's so many great things to look at on this team. And when the quarterback position steps up in its level of play, all of those things kind of come together. So, yeah, I mean, it's going really well, and I think that people are really pleased. So, obviously disappointed with the result in week 1. But, moving forward from there, Miami has dominated teams that they should dominate, and that has not always been the case in years past where, inferior teams were able to stick around against Miami. And I know people are going to look at the FIU score and be like, oh, that score was close. Yeah, we're playing second and third stringers for the whole fourth quarter to get them experience. But if we would have pressed on the gas, that would have been a 40 or 50-point win. So Miami is dominating games that they should dominate, winning by 27.5 points a game after that opening loss. So really rounding into shape across the board. So it's not just N'Kosi Perry. There's so many really good things to like, and I'm glad to see that play really come to fruition throughout this season.
So at the point in time that I connected with you on social media, Brad Kaya was the starting quarterback. You were, for the most part, an ardent supporter of Brad Kaya. N'Kosi Perry, N'Kosi Perry, if he fulfills his potential in a reasonable manner, could be the best Miami quarterback since.
Yeah, no, this is a conversation that we've had for a long time. I would say he could be the best Miami quarterback since Ja'Cory Harris, if not going back further. I mean, there's really nobody on the in-between who, and they're fine, and anything, but like, I think that the N'Kosi Perry's ceiling is higher than Brad Kaya's. And that was with Brad Kaya being the all-time career-leading passer, almost throwing for 10,000 yards in 3 seasons. Like, Brad Kaya was very good. I'm not disparaging him, but I think that Perry has the talent to be better. Obviously, the production and performance needs to meet that, but I think that, if you look back to the FIU game, that slant bang 8, whatever you want to call it, I think it was like a skinny post. It was like a bang 8. So, 3-step drop, hit that right foot in the ground, and then you're going to throw that ball right on time. That throw to Lawrence Cager for that first touchdown against FIU was a throw that you don't see often in general. And N'Kosi Perry has the arm talent and ability to make throws like that, and make throws that very few players of that position can make. And if he continues his current progression, I think that he can be a really, really special player here.
Let's remind everyone on the live chat while you guys are commenting to each other and arguing. We've got Cam on the line here from State of the U, and let's take advantage. So if you've got any specific questions on Miami football or this game against Florida State, fire away. I am monitoring the live chat. So Cam, can you think of a time in which you were campaigning for a quarterback, or you wanted to see the backup in play, and you had this type of excitement or feeling about the next guy getting the shot that you've been anticipating? Has there been a time when maybe there was that second guy waiting in the wings that was kind of stuck behind the incumbent, but you and the fan base were waiting on that day to come?
No, not really, because, it's pretty much been one guy, and then they stick around for a while. So whether it's Brock Berlin, whether that's – it was really Ja'Cory Harris, again, going, when Robert Marr was a redshirt freshman and Ja'Cory was a true freshman at Miami, back in, what was that, 08, 09. 09, yeah. But we'll go all the way back to then. So, I think that would be the time, really. So, again, the comparison, or, who could be the best since, I think it would be the same kind of thing, since Ja'Cory Harris. So that would be the similar kind of a time. So, yeah, we've seen some really great things. We've seen proof positive of the kind of talent that N'Kosi Perry has for the Hurricanes, and hopefully he's able to maintain his level of play. And again, a record-setting high school quarterback. He's really developed well. It's taken some time for him to really kind of settle in here at Miami, but yeah, he's a kid who can play the position well. He can make every single throw that you want. So yeah, I'm very excited for him. I think that the fan base is very excited as well. And it just, the floor gets raised, and then the ceiling it's not even the roof anymore. To quote Michael Jordan from North Carolina, like the ceiling, I don't think that there is a ceiling. So I mean, it's just it's stratospheric, sky high. So we can get as high as up there with our performance as possible. So yeah, just having N'Kosi Perry out there is just, I think it could be a transformational move for this team, and I'm very excited about it.
I don't know if you guys down there, in addition to just the turnover chain, have kind of an addendum or a super turnover chain, or when you turn that instantly into points, which happened 3 times against North Carolina for the first time in, I think I heard, since 2000, with the last time that happened in Miami, 3 touchdowns converted from the turnover chain. The defense is playing lights out for the most part.
Yeah, no, that was the first time in a long, long time. I think it was like 2000 or 03 since Miami had 3 defensive touchdowns in the same game. And, beat down a bad North Carolina team just the way that a good team should. Yeah, so, I mean, it was a little different. Some people have talked about the fact of, there is not a secondary thing for the touchdown to go along with the turnover. I did see one of our readers on State of the U. He wrote either a comment or a fan shot, and he said, okay, we should bring back turnover chain volume 1. And you should wear both, so 2 chains. So you get the IBIS chain and then you get the U chain both if you score a touchdown on your created turnover or returned turnover. So I think that could be a fun thing. But even absent that, the defense has been really strong. The best pass defense in America, the most tackles for loss in America, the most tackles per loss per game, the nation's leading defense or third down defense. I think that teams are teams are converting like less than 13% of third downs against Miami. And that was a point of emphasis. And, Miami's offense is also converting way, way more third downs than last year. I think it's up to 48%, up from 31% third down conversions for Miami's offense. So, yeah, the defense is just, they're playing really strong. Players on every level look amazing. Joe Jackson and John Garvin, the starting DNs, both look like first-round draft picks. Gerald Willis III, returning from a leave of absence at defensive tackle. He's been a beast among men. He's been absolutely unblockable. He's tied for the nation's lead with in tackles for loss. Every week I just tweet out, he's making himself money for the NFL draft, and all the NFL draft analysts around from any kind of website or even from NFL.com are saying, yes, he's, the number 2 graded or number 1 graded defensive tackle in terms of pass rush. He's disrupting all these plays and things like that. So at every level of the defense, they're really stepping up, and then actually starting to get more turnovers and take advantage of the situations that were there is obviously a positive. So yeah, maybe we'll bust out the 2 chains if anybody was able to return an interception or a fumble for a touchdown. But even absent that, Miami's defense is playing really, really strong, and I think that's a good thing as we go into the heart of ACC play, and obviously this week against the rival Florida State Seminoles.
Cam Underwood joining us from State of the U, and please join him there for Miami football coverage with the Canes lining up against Florida State coming up this Saturday. So are we down to the offensive line? Are you pleased with every unit? Do we narrow this down to an offensive line issue of whether Miami's going to be good this year or great?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I see, honestly. The offensive line, they're stepping up to being, at least average, and that's resulted in Miami running for more than 200 yards in consecutive weeks, which is a thing that has not happened in a while. So it's not perfect. The tackles can get beat clean on pass rushes. Both the left tackle, Tyree St. Louis, and right tackle, Navon Donaldson, we've seen them get beat, and not even touch the defenders as they're going speed rushes around the corner, which is a problem. So they need to fix that. But overall, I think that the play of the offensive line is starting to come together. Benzel Bulware starting in place of Jahair Jones at left tackle, so a little bit of a switch there. And then you have other guys like freshman DJ Scaife, who can play outside or inside, but he's pushing for playing time as well, and also rotating in on the offensive line. So I think that that's been a big, step forward for Miami's offense. And then, yeah, I mean, one of, if not the best wide receiver groups in America, and that's even without Amon Richards, who continues to battle injuries. One of the best running back rooms in America, obviously, and they're playing like that. 2 freshman tight ends who are who were the best at their positions in last year's recruiting class. And Brevin Jordan, the new starting tight end, is playing like the next great thing at, tight end university, because Miami is tight end U, and you can look at any NFL roster through the course of time to, be proven on that. And like I said, defensive line, linebacker, secondary, secondary, everybody's really stepping up. Everybody's really buying in. Kicker, we have a freshman there, and he's doing okay so far, 4 for 5 on field goals and 27 for 28 on extra points. The punter situation needs to get addressed because Zach Fiegels is not even as good as last year, and he wasn't really great last year. But otherwise, yeah, I think that offensive line definitely is going to tell the key for this season, because if there's time to throw for N'Kosi Perry and there's room to run for these running backs, well, he and the running backs, there's very few teams who can keep up with Miami's skill talent. So, yeah, I think the offensive line is really going to be a thing that is a barrier between being good or great, and also attrition and depth, because Miami's already seen injuries impact this season. Amon Richards hurt his knee in the opener against LSU and it's not played since. Jaquan Johnson missed the last 2 games, but he's probably going to come back this week. Shaq Quarterman rolled his ankle last week against North Carolina in the first half, tried to come out in the second half, couldn't go. His replacement, Mike Smith, hurt his leg in the second half against North Carolina, but all those other guys are going to be back. But what if they're not? What if Michael Jackson and a cornerback gets hurt? What if Sheldrick Redwine or another guy in the secondary gets hurt? So that depth is going to be a thing that could be a factor as well. But between offensive line and depth, I think those are the really 2 issues that Miami has to kind of fight through and overcome, through the course of the season.
We've got Steve Helwick waiting in the wings. He joins us from the University of Texas campus station, also the Daily Texan, to talk Texas, Oklahoma. We'll do Florida State, Miami justice right here with Cam first and foremost. All right. It's Florida State week. So give us, well, it's always your best, but in regards to this being the rivalry of rivalries in terms of your lifespan, your fandom, and why this is a special game, regardless of the particular plight of these specific teams in 2018.
It's Miami and Florida State. Over the course of the last 30, 35, 40 years, it's been one of the preeminent rivalries in all of college football. Just the NFL talent on both sides of the ball every single year. Even, 2013 when Florida State won a national championship and beat Miami 41-14. That game was 14-all in the first half. Florida State scored before the half. Duke Johnson broke his ankle, and then they really blew us out. But, it's just anywhere you look. You just think of iconic moments, all the wide rights, the wide lefts, the screen pass to Willis McGahee. Big-time players make big-time plays in big-time games from Santana Moss. Everybody says that. The halftime I'm hurt dog speech. And everybody knows that. Everybody knows those things. So, Miami, Florida State is iconic. And it has been because, both teams are major national brands, multiple national championships, Miami with 5, Florida State with 3, epic rivalry games. Superstar players on both sides, whether you're talking about Peter Warrick, Santana Moss, the late Sean Taylor, John Vilma, Derek Brooks at Florida State, Chris Winkie in a Heisman season at Florida State, and all kinds, Dalvin Cook, who single-handedly beat Miami 3 times, Jameis Winston, and all kinds of other dudes, Jimmy Graham, Jeremy Shockey, Bryant McKinney, the list goes on and on and on. So between the games and the players, that has propelled this rivalry into the forefront of college football fandom. So, through the course of me being associated with the University of Miami since the year 2000, when I was a freshman at UM. It's just been great. Miami won for the first time in 6 years or 7 years against Florida State my freshman year. That was the 2000 Jeremy Shockey game, if you remember that, on that next to last drive. Because Florida State got the ball afterwards and they came back down. But that was, 8 million degrees at the Orange Bowl. I remember the first time I ever heard the Seminole War chant in person. And it was 85,000 people screaming at the Orange Bowl after a sack or something. And he had the one drum major stand up, and they were in the upper deck of the old Orange Bowl in the open end zones. I can see it like it was yesterday. And the one drum major stands up in front of the band, and he plays that whistle. And I don't know where they get these whistles from, but you can hear this whistle from miles away. Dee, 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 dee. And they just cue up, and the drums have a fill before the pickup. Chicka, chicka, pa, and it just hits this downbeat. It was this wall of sound. And 80,000 people shut up because there was just this hot fire being blown from the upper deck stands at us from the Seminole band and everything. And it's just, if you're a college football fan, this is a game that gets your blood going. If you're a Miami or Florida State fan, whether you went there or not, whether you've just been a lifelong fan or not, this is a game that every year you circle that date on the calendar. It's a destination game. And I know that you have, the gentleman from Texas coming on next. It's like the Red River Rivalry. They know when that is every single year. There's no, is it Is it November 3rd or is it no? There's no questioning. You know exactly when that is. Miami, Florida State is that exact same thing. So whether the teams are up or the teams are down, whether Miami is going to win a championship or Florida State, it doesn't matter. It always is going to be a tightly contested game. Guys are going to play harder. They're going to try harder. They're going to execute better because these are guys they played with and against all the way back from Optimus football. So when you first strap on a helmet at 5 years old, some of those guys were your teammates. Some of those guys were, they played at the other park that you played against, whether it's Washington Park, whether it's Bunch Park, whether it's Scott Lake, whether it's in these places down in Miami or around the state of Florida. The connection is so very tight. So, yeah, I mean, for all those reasons and many more, Miami, Florida State, it is a rivalry that matters. It's an iconic kind of a thing, and hopefully we have an iconic beatdown by Miami on Florida State coming up on Saturday because, we do owe them some get back and they've, stretched out some leads against us in the past. But even when Miami was down, these games were close. So, I do think that Miami's going to win, spoiler alert, if you're going to ask me what my prediction is. And I hope that Miami is able to stretch it out a little bit. But, if this game were a touchdown game or a field goal game, I wouldn't be really surprised because these things happen in this kind of a rivalry. So, for, like I said, all the reasons I've said and even more, Miami and Florida State is an iconic rivalry. It's a thing. It's a destination game where if you've never been to, you might want to go to it. It might be a little bit different than going to, Nebraska, Iowa game, and definitely down here because we got a little different flavor down here in South Florida. But no, it's a great game. It's a thing that we always look forward to. And I'm very excited to be in the stands on Saturday.
I encourage everybody who's watching this, whether you're on the Florida State side or the Miami side, or if you're just a college football nerd like most of us on here that love all the big games and the big teams, to search on the channel Miami Florida State preview, and you would find over the last, I'm guessing, 4 to 5 years, previews and also recaps from Cam and I talking Miami Florida State. And we've had some really good discussions talking about the emergence of these two programs way back when, early 80s in through the 80s, and where they both kind of emerged as great powers in college football amongst all the stodge programs that have been around forever, the Notre Dames and Ohio States and Michigans and Alabamas, and where these two just rose up, and especially for a time period from about the late 80s on through for the next decade and a half, where you saw the best talent on the field in one stadium year in, year out, with Florida State and Miami on the field, and just rolling through the names and talking about Cam's hit it from every angle, from recruiting to just venom and healthy respect, healthy hate, and all the various angles of Florida State, Miami through the years up to the current time. And we've had some great discussions on it a number of times. So in terms, Cam, of this particular game, before we talk some Texas, Oklahoma here in a few minutes, have you had much time to sit down and watch Florida State? They got punched in the mouth on opening night against Virginia Tech. And at the point, we probably gave Virginia Tech a little bit too much credit and thinking, wow, they played an amazing game. Maybe they've arrived in the Coastal and they're going to be the chief competitor to the Canes. And then Florida State continued to struggle for another couple of weeks and even last week, but they maybe got a little bit of momentum in finally eking out a win against a down Louisville team with 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. But have you had a chance to track this team and what's wrong?
Yeah, I mean, and this should come as no surprise. I watch every Florida State game. I don't probably watch them live, but live, I should say, but my TV's right over there. And I have a DVR that can record 3 or 4 things at the same time. And with recaps or replays and things like that as well. Florida State is a rival team. And I mean, especially with, I got my bones, I got my start blogging as a recruiting blogger. So that's a thing that I'm heavily involved in and follow. So obviously the recruiting aspect is a thing that keeps me connected to both schools. But yeah, no, I watch Florida State. And yeah, they're 3-2. And everything. And they got a lucky win last week because of the stupidest play call I've ever seen by Bobby Petrino up late. And with, I know Florida State had timeouts left, but run the ball, buddy. I mean, there was no need to throw that pass. And, that ended up coming back to bite them. But, realistically, Florida State, without a stretch of imagination, could easily be 1-4 at this time because Samford FBS team or FCS ran out of gas, but after throwing for almost 500 yards against them, Louisville, if Jawan Pass was good at what his last name is, throwing the ball pass, he could have had 4 or 5 or 6 extra touchdowns. I mean, you got guys running wide open through that Florida State secondary. So you see it once against Virginia Tech, and you see it again against Samford, and then you see it again against Louisville. You know, once is an accident, twice is a trend, 3 times is evidence. And yeah, I think that there's evidence that there's, you know, a porous nature to Florida State's defense that hopefully Miami can exploit. Obviously, you know, with a better and more accurate quarterback back there. Florida State has all kinds of talent, and I went on a Twitter string, a while ago talking about the level of talent on the roster. So it won't be necessarily easy. You know, they do have talented wide receivers. They do have talented quarterbacks. They have talented running backs. They have talented every level on defense. But talent is one thing and skill is another. And I see a lot of talent and a little skill, you know, develop demonstrable performance on the field. Yeah, so, you know, I think that there are definitely some issues. Florida State can't block anybody, and I think that that's really going to be the downfall for them against a Miami team that is first in the nation in tackles for loss. Like I said already, you know, they're holding opponents under 13% third down conversions. Things like that are really going to come back to bite Florida State. Florida State has been able to throw the ball vertically, however. So when they get to Tamorrion Terry and Naquan Murray and things going up the field, they are explosive in the passing game. If DeAndre Francois has time, it is my hope and goal for Miami to not allow him to have time. So there are some things to like. Obviously, again, their defensive line, big, fast, strong. Across the board, Brian Burns. You have Marvin Wilson, who was a 5-star as a second string or rotating in defensive tackle. You even have guys like DeCallan Brooks, who is Derek Brooks's son. He's not as big or as good as his father, but he's playing very strong right now. Stanford Samuels III in the secondary, Kyle Myers, Levante Taylor. So, I mean, there is talent there, but, I mean, there are some really big systemic issues and things are not coalescing for them early. So I think that those are the things that Miami is going to try to take advantage of on Saturday. Hey,
Cam, before we let you go,
yep.
What did you think of the Willie Taggart hire when it was made?
Yeah, you know, I think that the hire was contingent upon a thing that fell through, and I think that was contingent upon Jim Leavitt and Mario Cristobal coming with him from Oregon to Florida State. And that was what gave me pause, because had Leavitt and Cristobal came down, especially Cristobal is a recruiting ace. He went to Miami, played O-line at Miami. He's a, you know, championship football player, you know, back in the 90s and things like that. You know, his sons go to Columbus. He went to Miami Columbus High School, which has put so many different people in college with names that you know. Had those guys come with Taggart, I think that this would be a very different situation. And when it quickly was seen that neither Jim Leavitt, the defensive coordinator, nor Mario Cristobal, the offensive coordinator, were coming with him, Cristobal gets the head coaching job, Leavitt stays out there with a raise, I think that changed the entire complexion of the Willie Taggart hire. So, yeah, I think that I think that what Florida State bought isn't exactly what they got. You know what I mean? It's like when you buy a television, but it has no power cord, no HDMI cables, it has no way to connect to the other things. Like, it's a beautiful thing. It's, you know, 65 inches. It's supposed to be 4K, but now I got to go and I got to get these other things. But it didn't come with everything that I thought it was going to come with. I think that that is an accurate description of what I thought about the Willie Taggart hire. I think that he's a decent coach. I mean, but he's under 500 for his career. And I know people are going to point to Western Kentucky was a tire fire when he got there. So there's going to be a couple losing years. USF was a tire fire when he got there. There's going to be a couple losing years. Even still, his record against winning teams and ranked teams is not that great. And again, if he had the proper support that he built, because no man is an island, and especially on a coaching staff where you have 10 assistants, those guys matter. And especially in the world of college football, when player acquisition, i.e. recruiting, is the lifeblood of your program, those things matter. And yeah, Leavitt and Cristobal not coming was a big blow to, I think, what their coaching staff and their program is going to be. And it'll be interesting to see how that goes afterwards. But was I scared or frightened when they said Willie Taggart was going to be the coach? Absolutely not.
And Leavitt, the former South Florida head coach, is a defensive ace. He was at Colorado, and the aberration of aberrations over the last 5 to 6 years in college football was Colorado jumping up with 10 wins a couple years ago, winning the Pac-12 South, and he was the defensive coordinator. He goes to Oregon. They improved in the advanced metrics on defense by like 70 positions last season, and they're just as good this year, if not better. They're playing really good, and if they wouldn't have had the Bobby Petrino type play calling near the end of the game against Stanford, they'd be ranked in the top 10 and undefeated right now themselves.
Exactly.
All right, Cam Underwood, State of the U, and of course you go there for all your Miami sports coverage. And Cam, I'll turn that over to you to let people know what's there right now as they prepare for Florida State.
Gotcha. I got two quick things. I'm going to start with my preview or my prediction. The line is Miami by 13.5 or favored by 13.5 points, and I picked Miami to cover. If you put up anonymous blind stat profiles for these two teams and gave them to people, people would pick the Miami profile team with, if you have no name, no context, they would pick the Miami profile team by 3 or 4 touchdowns. I don't think it's going to be 3 or 4 touchdowns, but I do think it's going to be substantial. I don't think that Florida State can block Miami. I don't think they're going to convert third downs. I don't think that they fixed the issues in their secondary. And I do think that N'Kosi Perry is going to be able to hit timely throws because guys are going to be wide open, and he's not going to miss them like Jawan Pass did. So give me Miami about 38-20. It should be one of Miami's biggest wins against Florida State. It's going to be Miami's first home win against Florida State since 2004. And so I'm on record saying that. It'll be up on the website very soon. I think that goes up on Friday morning, if not earlier. So that's my prediction and commentary for the game. Speaking of which, we have a story stream up on stateoftheu.com with all of our Florida State week content from, all kinds of commentary and analysis, including today, the Florida State players that we miss. Chris Ricks, love you, buddy. 0-5 against Miami. You're my favorite. And all kinds of other things. So you can check me out on Twitter at Underwood Sports. You can check the website Twitter, which I also manage and cultivate, at The State of the U on Twitter. We're facebook.com/The State of the U. And also the website is stateoftheu.com. So whether it's basketball, whether it's recruiting, football, or even non-revenue sports, we try to cover Miami in a 360 kind of a way. So come on over. You'll probably find something that you like. And if you find something that you hate, let us know and we can talk about it. So yeah, State of the U on all kind of social channels, or Underwood Sports is my personal one, or The State of the U on Twitter, The State of the U, Facebook, and stateoftheu.com, where they're talking about Miami 24/7, 365. Come fan with us.
Cam, I'm going to clip off this segment with you. I'm going to send it your way. If you want to use it, great. If you don't, no worries. I appreciate you always coming on.
No problem. I'll definitely put that up. So I know that, the Texas gentleman has been waiting for a while, so I'll get out of you guys' hair. But I hope that you tune in to ABC at 3:30 on Saturday and see Miami beat Florida State.
I will be there. All right, Cam. It's always a pleasure, man. Take care.
See you, my friend.
Great night. Cam Underwood, State of the U, the one and only. Steve Helwick, the one and only. We are waiting his take on Texas, Oklahoma. We're also going to get Steve's take on what's big in the MAC this week. Steve joins us from the campus station there at the University of Texas, also the Daily Texan and SB Nation's Hustle Belt. Steve, I appreciate you so much hanging out and waiting your turn. How you doing tonight?
It's great. Texas, Oklahoma, and the reason it's better this year is College game day is coming, and that always intensifies every single atmosphere. So this will be my first time going to a Texas, Oklahoma game, as I'll be covering it, but I'm excited just for the whole atmosphere and the whole week in itself.
So to you, who has one side of this rivalry, similar to talking to Cam from the Miami side of the Florida State rivalry, your thoughts about what makes this one unique in terms of its scope in the landscape of college football?
The thing that I think makes it unique is it's one of the few neutral site rivalries. I know that Colorado and Colorado State usually play at Sports Authority Field, Mile High, and Denver. Florida, Georgia play in Jacksonville, and then Texas, Oklahoma play in Dallas. I can't think of any more neutral site rivalries off the top of my head, but that's one thing in itself, and it's always runs concurrent with the Texas State Fair, which is basically where you can try any fried food in the world, from fried Oreos to fried butter to who knows what Texans create now. So the fact that it's inside the Texas State Fair, I think a game ticket is actually a state fair ticket. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but I believe that's how it is. That's just one thing important. So there's always a good backdrop for the game, and it's at the Cotton Bowl Stadium, not Jerry World where the Cotton Bowl is played, but the Cotton Bowl Stadium, which I've talked to an Oklahoma player this week, and he told me what the atmosphere looks like, split down the middle, half burnt orange, half crimson, just a cool atmosphere every single year, no matter how bad the teams. No matter how good Oklahoma, no matter how separate Oklahoma and Texas seem in caliber, it seems to produce a very good game every single year. We've had one possession games for I think 3 seasons in a row now, so 4 seasons in a row now. So it's always been a good game.
Along those lines, Steve, just to look at the major bowl games, the traditional major bowl games, we still have a actual Rose Bowl that houses the Rose Bowl, of course, in Pasadena. The Orange Bowl is no more in Miami. We still have a Orange Bowl game, but it's not played at the Orange Bowl, which is defunct. It's gone. It's been destroyed. The one-time home of the Miami Dolphins. The Sugar Bowl, that doesn't exist in regards to a football stadium that was once Tulane Stadium, actually was the home of the Sugar Bowl and a couple Super Bowls before it gave way to the Superdome, the home of the New Orleans Saints, and the Sugar Bowl. The Peach Bowl, there's no Peach Bowl. We could go on down the line. It's one of the very few venues that, yes, there is a Cotton Bowl that for decades and decades and decades, and when I started watching college football, the Cotton Bowl that you referenced that is still home to the Texas-Oklahoma annual rivalry game is the stadium that the Cotton Bowl, I think, as a purist, should be played in. I totally understand the move to a luxurious place with suites and all the amenities that the modern day fan expects. But the Cotton Bowl is just this old, sunken, wide, one of those, if you see Michigan Stadium, the big house, where it's almost as long as it is it's just amazing how big of a bowl it is because it's just one tier, basically. There is an upper deck, but it's just a big bowl, and that's what the Cotton Bowl is. And now we just have the SMU, I think, I don't even know if they play there anymore. They don't know. They built their own stadium about 10 years ago, so they don't play there. I know that the Heart of Dallas Bowls played there, and that's pretty much about it. And I'm sure they play a lot of high school football there at the Cotton Bowl, but it's reserved for this date, and it is the actual Cotton Bowl, one of the landmark stadiums in the history of college football. Texas, Oklahoma. Of course, Oklahoma has been the gold standard in the Big 12 for quite some time. Texas last won a national championship or played for the national championship in 2009, and just a couple of years after that was the transfer of power, where there was a tussle for a long time, for about a decade, between Stoops and Brown. Oklahoma has definitely been the king of the Big 12 for quite some time. Texas, though, with 2 impressive wins under its belt, the last one extremely important in vying for a Big 12 championship game against TCU. So before we move on to Oklahoma, Texas, your thoughts about the way the Longhorns played, specifically in the second half when they took over that game against TCU?
That was the emergence of Texas we saw this year, but a lot of it was because the Longhorns were able to create turnovers in that game. When you win the turnover battle 4-0, and they were forcing a lot of bad throws on Sean Robinson, forced a fumble on him too. And then Texas's defense led to Texas's offense being successful. Sam Ehlinger is in the best stretch of his career. He's now 3rd in Texas history with 128 straight passes without an interception, which is a major improvement for Ehlinger. The running game is looking slightly better, although it's not at an elite level yet. And the receivers in the TCU game were getting targeted more. I thought Texas did an overall better job at running the offense. But for the Longhorns, a lot of that backtracked last week. They only beat Kansas State 19-14. I honestly think Kansas State, you could arguably say, is the worst team in the Big 12 this year. I'm not so sure if it's clear-cut Kansas now. Kansas State has not looked very good at all. It's always a tough game in Manhattan, but Texas only won that 19-14 after a 19-0 lead. The defense kind of let up in the second half, so they lost a lot of that momentum from the TCU game, I think, going into Oklahoma week. But it's a new week for the Longhorns, and they went into the USC game after just a 7-point win over Tulsa at home, an underwhelming win. So Texas has been in this position before after an underwhelming win against an opponent that they probably should have beat by more. But I think the Longhorns can recover and mature and just make sure it's a new week when Oklahoma.
Steve, we've got a big Oklahoma fan on the line that joins us on a regular basis here in the live chat, 288028, a big Adrian Peterson fan of the Sooners. Great tailback from years gone by. He mentions here that Texas leads the series since 1950, 33, 32, and 5. It's been that close. 33-32 Texas since 1950. It's just a remarkable game. We do remember that 4 years ago in 2000, actually it was 2015, was the year that Oklahoma made it to the college football playoff. Of course, won the conference championship, but Texas was the lone loss on the season. So this one's difficult to predict. Even a dominant Oklahoma team could only squeeze by a 6-6 Texas team last year, 29-24, with a great Baker Mayfield in play. And with that segue, we go to Kyler Murray's play. Steve, I don't know how much you've gotten a chance to see Kyler Murray, but 7 touchdown passes, or 7 total touchdowns accounted for against Baylor. And it looks like the Oklahoma offense hasn't missed a beat.
Yes, Kyler Murray had the best game of his career last year. I remember I watched him a lot at Texas A&M, and I didn't think Oklahoma was actually going to be that talented going into the season. But Lincoln Riley has turned Kyler Murray into a brand new animal, a Heisman candidate, and it just seems like Oklahoma can have a good quarterback every single year, whether this is Jason White or Sam Bradford. Even Landry Jones looked really good there. Oklahoma is quarterback U probably, and Kyler Murray is no exception. 6 touchdown passes last week, 432 yards. He had more touchdowns than incompletions in the Baylor game. Now, Baylor's not the gold standard of defense, but it's still just an impressive stat. Remarkable, 348 quarterback rating. Kyler Murray's just been incredible this year, and he's been able to do it on the ground somewhat too. Not the most mobile quarterback, but not in a like he won't run for 100 yards a game, but he can pick up those valuable yards on the ground. He's a good scrambler. Very accurate. Oklahoma usually doesn't require him to pass that much a game because the Sooners are always blowing teams out. I would have liked to see more from him in that Army game where he only threw 15 passes and completed 11 of them, where I think that was Murray's biggest struggle yet, because he's just been very successful this year with the Sooners. And he's going to be a tough quarterback to stop, even if Texas's defense has looked good this year. They faced a young JT Daniels, a young Sean Robinson in USC and TCU. Now Kyler Murray, who's had experience at Texas A&M playing in big games before, and now he's at Oklahoma and is already off to a hot start. This will be the best quarterback Texas faces this season so far. So I think it's going to be a huge test for the defense to see how they can limit him.
If you do some score comparisons here, you got to think that Texas has some level of a shot, because Oklahoma, for as dominant as they've been on offense and winning that game by 30 points against Baylor, I was tracking that game, watched most of it. I was going back and forth between games, but that was a 2-score game into the fourth quarter. It wasn't a complete blowout where it was said and done by that time. It was in that 42-28 range, something like that. Before it got out of hand late. Of course, you mentioned the Army game where Oklahoma was lucky to survive in overtime. The Iowa State game, the Cyclones have proven that they're probably not one of the better teams in the Big 12. They're decent, but not necessarily going to have the season that they had last year. They were able to handle or hang with Oklahoma for the majority of game, and it was still a game with about 5 minutes left to play. So Texas has to be somewhat encouraged by Oklahoma looking like they can play with the rest of the pack in the Big 12. They're not far and away the best team.
Yes, and you mentioned that Iowa State game, which I thought was really important because Iowa State's wide receiver, Hakeem Butler, seemed like he almost single-handedly took down Oklahoma that day. And I think that's a similar thing that Texas needs to look at. And the Longhorns need a wide receiver, Colin Johnson or Lil Jordan Humphrey, who just plays, or even both, who just plays out of his mind against that Sooner secondary. I'd say the Sooner secondary is their weak point in the defense so far. We saw Baylor putting up numbers on them. And just in previous weeks, teams have looked good against Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a team that's going to beat you offensively. And they didn't really do an excellent job of stopping the triple option either of Army. But then again, Texas doesn't really have a run game. So Texas' best bet against Oklahoma is to have a wide receiver with a Hakeem Butler-like performance against the Sooners defense.
And so you got Colin Johnson, you've got Lil Jordan Humphrey. They've kind of taken their turns in regards to being the #1 target for that particular week, probably based on defensive scheme and who they favor in that particular matchup, whether it was TCU last week or USC the week before. Sam Ehlinger, as we discussed last week or the week before, has played better in recent weeks. He seems to have matured and grown into the position. What do you think is, we talked in the offseason a lot about the Texas offensive line maybe not being the unit that's going to keep them from championship caliber play. What do you see out of the running game and specifically the offensive line in both pass blocking and run blocking that would make you feel good about Texas taking the next step or possibly it being a continued challenge in trying to reach the level of Oklahoma?
Offensive line, it's not been great. It's not been absolutely terrible. I'd say serviceable. They've given up 9 sacks this season through 5 games, which a little more than 2 a game. But the run blocking has suffered a little bit, and Texas has yet to establish a run game since Deontay Foreman was on campus. And that is something that's going to make Texas more one-dimensional against Oklahoma. But the one thing where they do add another dimension is Sam Ehlinger's legs. He is the best runner on the team, and he's very mobile quarterback, likes to scramble a lot and make plays on his own. So Ehlinger has that, and a lot of times he'll run off of blown blocks. Someone will be pressuring him in the backfield, and he'll just burst and go for it himself. So Sam Ehlinger, he'll have to have a big aim with his legs in order to keep Texas's offense more multidimensional, because I'm not expecting anything out of Trey Watson or Keontae Ingram like a 100-yard game that's going to match Oklahoma pound for pound on offense. They're not going to put up numbers like Trey Sermon's probably going to put up on the ground on Saturday. So Texas has to stay multidimensional by having Sam Ehlinger look really good with the run game and the wide receivers just playing out of their minds.
So what are the chances here? 80-20, 70-30, something in that range?
Yeah, that sounds good about Oklahoma with a 75% chance to win. I'm still debating on where I'm at with the spread. Every single year I take Oklahoma with the spread because usually it's an unranked Texas team, and they make the spread really small, and it baits you into taking Oklahoma with the points, and it never happens. Texas always seems to cover. Even last year, Oklahoma jumps out to a 17-0 lead. We all say, this is over. Let's flip the channel to Miami, Georgia Tech. And then Texas comes back, takes a 24-23 lead on the Sooners, and Oklahoma wins on that Mark Andrews touchdown 29-24 late, and the Sooners defense is able to get a stop on Ehlinger and the offense.
Steve Helwick joining us from the campus cable station there at the University of Texas. He also writes for the Daily Texan and does work for the Hustle Belt there at the MAC Conference, SB Nation platform for the Mid-American Conference. And we'll talk some MAC here in just a second. In analyzing college football, and we've had discussions off camera about the landscape, and we kind of narrow you down on Texas, but you're watching everything in sight and tracking everything. Where do you think Oklahoma and Texas, where would you rank them among the powers in college football? Is Oklahoma a top 5 team, top 10 team? Where do you place Texas? Are they a top 20 or 25 team, something in that range?
That sounds about right. I tend to focus more of those program rankings on more of a new landscape. I have a huge Excel document where I just analyze about every stat on teams in the college football playoff era, because I think that's a really good barrier with 2014, where we ushered in a new era of college football. And Oklahoma is going to have one of the best records in college football and the best record in the Big 12 since 2014, while Texas, one interesting fact about this game is with a win, they finally get to 500 in the college football playoff era. I think they would be 28-28 with a victory on Saturday,
wow.
While Oklahoma has a much better record. They're the gold standard of the Big 12. They have more national championships than Texas, more Heisman winners, and a lot more Big 12 titles. They have double digit. It's probably around 11 or 12, while Texas has 3, and the conference has been around since the mid-90s. So Oklahoma recently, if you take out the Darrell K. Royal era of Texas and just focus everything since maybe Bob Stoops, Mac Brown, Oklahoma's been the better program overall, even though they both have one national championship this millennium. But it's clearly Oklahoma's conference now. Oklahoma has 2 playoff appearances. They're going for number 3 this year. Texas has yet to get more than 7 wins in the playoff era. So this is the time. This is a huge game for the Longhorns because with a win, I think their confidence skyrockets. And this is where they can try to finally make that jump into being more of an elite program, one that we're going to put in our New Year Six Bowl conversations, which we haven't done yet. We're still focusing on Oklahoma and West Virginia being the Big 12 representatives come December and January. So this is an absolutely huge game for Texas's program direction in general, because it turns them from, right now they look like a very good program, but a win here could set them on track for the rest of the season from very good to just that New Year Six caliber that they haven't been close to yet. And I think that's really important for the Longhorns.
All right, Steve, you're in my wheelhouse now. I'm fascinated. You've got a spreadsheet.
Yes.
And you were tracking what since the college football playoff era started?
I have every single team's records year by year with their total records, total win percentages, and sorted by conference. I have the final year, end of the year polls, and I've conglomerated that into one poll by the points that they've achieved. Like if you take into account 2014 to present, you have a top 10 of Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma, TCU, Wisconsin, Florida State, Michigan State, Stanford, USC, if you're going by AP points there. I have just a list of the teams that have made the New Year Six so far, how many selections, what years they've selected, their win-loss record in the New Year Six. Every single AP poll that has come into existence weeks 1 through bowl season since 2014. And I've also done a points ranking from there to see which teams have the highest rankings, what their peak in the poll is, how many weeks they've been in the poll. For example, we have Alabama with 1,660 points, then Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma, Florida State, Georgia, TCU, Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Notre Dame to round out the top 10. Oklahoma is 4th with 1,090 points, while Texas ranks 49th with just 60 points in the AP poll and only 8 weeks in the AP poll since 2014. I have a whole list of every single bowl game, the result, which have been selected, which bowls the most, their win-loss records there, how the conferences fare against each other in the bowls. I have a giant diagram which each conference's record against the other conferences and their overall records. As you can see, the independents aren't really a conference, but they have the best win percentage. Then the Sun Belt at 11-7, SEC at 27-20, all the way down to the MAC at 6-17. The MAC has gone 1-11 in bowls the last 2 years. Then I have a whole thing on conference championship games, 2014 in there, how each conference championship game has gone, each team's record in there, the frequency of teams appearing in there. And then I have a giant chart of all 130 teams compared, an x-axis and a y-axis, and in every single cell is the team's win and loss record against the other team in the playoff era. For example, if we go to Oklahoma and Texas, we can see that since 2014, Oklahoma is 3-1 against Texas. And I have this for every single team in college football, and I update it weekly so I can see which teams have won in certain series more likely. I know we were talking about Miami, Florida State before I got here on the show, so I can see that I think Florida State has gone 3-1 against Miami in the college football playoff era, with that only loss occurring last year when Miami won on that game-winning touchdown late. So there's a lot of important information I like to store about just college football in general since 2014, certain trends we've seen since, and I have an additional document analyzing every single year. So I have a 2018 exclusive document too.
So Steve, that sounds like something I would do, especially when I was your age, had a little more time, because I did things like that all the time. So do you give any perspective on the bowl results? So for example, the Big Ten and the SEC, if you go through year to year and you look at the teams that they play based on winning percentage and rankings, they play the 2 toughest bowl schedules every year. Maybe not every year, but over time, it's not even that close. So do you put any kind of measurement to, if the Big Ten's, let's say, 15-13 over 2 years and the Sun Belt's 15-13, that they're obviously their level of competition in terms of their opponents. Have you given any kind of metric to that?
I haven't added any metric to that, but I think when you're picking bowl games, it'll be a lot of times it's just about the matchup. I don't always factor in the conference records there unless I'm picking a MAC game, because the MAC never wins bowl games. But I mean, the Big Ten last year, Big Ten's always been criticized for their performance in bowls, and then last year they go 7-1 with Michigan blowing a 19-3 lead against South Carolina as the conference's only loss. So things go different from year to year. I just like to establish trends. Like before last year, when the Pac-12 went 1-8, the Pac-12 was actually performing as one of the best conferences in bowls. So things change year to year. You get different teams, different matchups. I just think it's fun to keep track of the records and sort of make it like a competitive way against competition. But I'm sure being a math major that there's definitely a way I could add some metrics in there to make this based on caliber of opponent and try to get a model on predicting winners. That would always be an interesting side project I could do during bowl season.
Well, I just think that you would find, and as soon as I spit this out, I think you'll agree, because you know what conferences go to what bowls and so forth and so on. But if you look at the SEC and the Big Ten year to year, the bowl opponents they play are ridiculous compared to the other conferences, specifically the Pac-12. Typically, if you go 3 to 4 deep in the Pac-12, they've dropped down to a Holiday Bowl, Las Vegas Bowl, and they're playing a little lesser competition. Versus again, there's a disparity there. So over this time frame, and it's not large, but it's still 4 seasons. Going into 2014, there was little doubt that the SEC was the best conference and had been the best conference for quite some time, about 7 or 8 years at least. After that, then we had the Big Ten step up, win a national championship, win big bowl games, and obviously led by Ohio State to be a big player. We had the ACC have an outstanding run 2 years ago and going 10-3 in postseason play, including 2 New Year's Six bowl wins with Florida State and Clemson, of course, the national champion. So do you have a determinant on best conference right now? What has been the best conference? Is it easy to see based on the numbers since 2014?
It's not exactly easy to see overall. I know one thing is, this isn't anything I really have in my document, but the SEC always does a great job at winning those week 1 neutral site out of conference games. Look, Auburn, Washington, Auburn wins it this year. Alabama is going to win those every single year. LSU usually takes their opponent on week 1. They did have that loss to Wisconsin to start the 2016 season, but then they beat Wisconsin in 2014 in Houston. SEC is always a safe bet to pick in those games because the conference has done really well in those week 1 games. So I like the SEC at the beginning of the season, but at the end of the season, sometimes they seem to fold in a lot of bowl games. And I think the Big Ten right now is the best conference because it's the most top heavy. But then with the top heavy, you also get the Rutgers, Nebraska, lower echelon of the conference with Illinois, and there isn't too much of a middle in the Big Ten, maybe Indiana and Purdue, but the top of the Big Ten, when you have Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, then you have Michigan, Michigan State, and Iowa. And although Northwestern's 1-3 this season, Northwestern's put up 2 10-win seasons in the last 3 years. So Northwestern's just right below those 6 teams I mentioned. That is better than what the SEC has to offer, because in the SEC, usually you'll have Bama being excellent and looking undefeatable. And then you'll have an Auburn or Georgia. And then you don't really have anything outside of LSU that matches, I think, the Big Ten's top 6.
So what would tend to play into a conference like the Big Ten faring a little bit better, and what also obviously gives more weight to the top half of a conference, is that, number one, those teams tend to schedule tougher non-conference opponents. Therefore, they're going to play more Power Fives than the other teams in the league. Like you will see on a regular basis, a Kansas, a Baylor, those kind of schools not schedule a Power Five. You'll see schools like USC and other major schools now playing 2 Power Fives, especially USC and Stanford automatically because they've got the Notre Dame rivalry. But then they also play, of course, a bowl game where the lower end of the leagues don't play in postseason play. So that gives more weight to, for example, Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, et cetera. The teams that regularly go to bowl games are going to be weighted more in your metrics than Rutgers, Illinois, those teams that miss postseason play. And in the case of a Rutgers this year, I don't believe, well, they played Kansas, so they did play a Power 5, but there have been seasons in which they did not even play a Power 5 and then didn't go to a bowl game, so they wouldn't even factor into your equation.
That's true. I mean, different programs have different goals. I think Rutgers right now is just looking for
survival,
a rebuild. Yeah, just not to lose by 50 every single week, but...
All right, we got Steve Helwick on the line from Hustle Belt. Also, we pin him down typically for Texas Football Talk. He's with the Daily Texan and also the University of Texas campus station there. I did want to hit on the MAC schedule as Steve writes for Hustle Belt. So we've got a list of games here. I'm just going to throw them out there, Steve, and you tell me what jumps out to you and what's important this week. So in the MAC, we've got Buffalo, who lost its first game last week to Army, going to Central Michigan. We've got Eastern Michigan, highlighted by a win over Purdue 20-19 earlier at Western Michigan. Northern Illinois, they played maybe the toughest non-conference schedule in the country. And it could have been tougher if Florida State would have been on its game, but Florida State, Iowa, and Utah. Northern Illinois goes to Ball State. Of course, they hung with Notre Dame. Ohio at Kent State. We've got Miami of Ohio at Akron. Of course, the Zips beat Northwestern, and we've got Bowling Green at Toledo. So what stands out?
There's a lot of evenly matched games this week. Three of them are more evenly matched. Three of them I'll do more of consensus type picks. Buffalo, Central Michigan. Buffalo is going to bounce back and win. It was a rough 42-13 loss to Army. They couldn't stop the triple option, which a lot of teams struggle with against those service academies. And also Buffalo had some bad luck, such as a blocked field goal return for a touchdown. And then the Bulls just sort of folded at the very end. Another throwaway game, Bowling Green, Toledo. There have been rumors that Bowling Green's, I think the Toledo Blade reported that Bowling Green's boosters are not in favor of the head coach right now. So we could see our first coach firing very soon with Mike Jenks. Mike Jenks has not won an FBS game in the month of September. He's not beaten an FBS team in the month of September in 3 seasons, 0-11. And Bowling Green's only win is a 7-point win over Eastern Kentucky of the FCS this year. If you remember, the Falcons were actually MAC East champions 3 years in a row from 2013-15 with 2 conference titles in there. Since the Falcons have just folded, you can always chalk them up for a top 10 worst defense in college football. They have the worst run defense right now, and Georgia Tech had no problem last week with a 63-17 win. So Toledo's probably going to do the same thing. Toledo last week, their quarterback, Mitch Guadagni, had a concussion against Fresno State, and the game was still close when the quarterback went out, and Fresno State took advantage of that and won 49-27 and actually scored 42 unanswered points on Toledo. So if he is healthy, he's listed as day-to-day. And even if he's not healthy, Toledo's going to crush Bowling Green. It's one of the best rivalries in the MAC, but it's not going to be close. And then Ohio, Kent State. We talked about Kent State making progress earlier in the season after having a 17-3 halftime lead over Illinois and looking good against Penn State for about a quarter and a half of action. But the Golden Flashes took a giant step back last week, losing 52-24 to a Ball State team that was coming off a loss to Western Kentucky. And I think Ohio breezes through this one. Ohio's offense has finally woken up. They dropped 58 on UMass last week. Nathan Rourke, phenomenal dual threat quarterback. He'll get it done on Kent State. So Ohio, Toledo, and Buffalo are your lock picks this week. And then Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan, that should be a good game. If anyone who's followed some Eastern Michigan football in the last 2 seasons know that the Eagles are the unluckiest team in the nation. They've had so many bad bounces their way. Last season they lost, I think it was 3 games in overtime. They lost 3 games in overtime, and they lost, I think it was 7 games in a row, all by 1 possession. So that is just 6 games in a row by 1 possession, something like that. And they lost another 1 possession game last week. They were beating NIU 10-0. They lose in triple overtime, 23-20. And during second overtime, NIU had a fumble. Chad Ryland had a shot at a game-winning field goal from a very makeable distance, missed it, and then NIU wins in overtime on a Trey Harbison touchdown run. So that was just another unfortunate break in Eastern Michigan's awful lore of just losing close game after close game. So Western Michigan's offense, they've really improved since the 49-3 loss to Michigan. John Wasink's looking like a much more developed passer, one of the best quarterbacks in the conference. think Western Michigan's going to win this one at Waldo Stadium this weekend. It's going to be close because Eastern Michigan's defense is excellent. The Eagles beat Purdue 20-19 this season, as you mentioned, and they held an impressive San Diego State team to an overtime game. So Eastern Michigan's defense has been good at limiting teams, but their offense hasn't been good in production. And another team like that, that's a good way to segue into Northern Illinois season. Northern Illinois has one of the best defenses in the nation, in my opinion. Got Sutton Smith, All-American defensive end, Kyle Pugh at the linebacker position. And NIU's offense hasn't been able to make up for it this year. The offense has such bad play calling, I would say. Lots of jet sweeps, halfback draws that don't really gain much yards, and then NIU has so many 3-and-outs. It didn't help that they had to play Iowa, Utah, and Florida State in non-conference, but still, the offense hasn't looked really good against Eastern. The offense didn't look good against Eastern Michigan this year, and that's why I'm a little concerned about NIU going into this game against Ball State on the road in Muncie, because Ball State's offense with Riley Neal and James Gilbert looked very good last week. They dropped 52 on Kent State. In Northern Illinois, maybe 2-0 in the MAC, but this is going to be a tough game at Ball State for the Huskies just because their offense hasn't been able to establish anything yet. So we have a tale of a great Ball State offense versus a great NIU defense, and the other sides of the ball just aren't at the same level. Last game of the weekend, we have Miami, Ohio at Akron. Miami, Ohio is 1-4. Akron's 2-1. Fun fact about Akron, I don't think we've talked about on the station yet. Are you familiar with the Nebraska-Akron rescheduling story?
The scheduling story, I know that Nebraska wanted to keep them around for the weekend to play the game on Sunday. I do know that portion of it.
And then Akron's AD said they couldn't get the hotel situation in time, and everyone was everywhere, and they couldn't get the game on Sunday. But Akron said that they still wanted to keep the game on the schedule, and they said that they wanted it on that first week of December during conference championship game. Although Akron did participate in the MAC championship game last season, and they already beaten Northwestern, so there are chances that Akron would play in that again. But Nebraska says that they're competing. Yes, Scott Frost at the time said that they're competing for a Big Ten title. And
technically, everybody's competing for the Big Ten title or their conference title.
Sure, Nebraska, if you want to. But then Nebraska's 0-4 right now, and they decided to spurn Akron and schedule Bethune-Cookman of the FCS instead. And Akron is owed, is it a $1.2 million check? And Akron's AD said that that's up to the courts now. And Akron's AD had a quote that said, "Nebraska didn't want to play at our level of competition," which I thought was an interesting quote, to say the least. Akron's 2-1 right now, a win over a Northwestern team with 10 wins a season ago. Lost to Iowa State, kept it close for a bit. And Iowa State this year, their 1-3 record, I think, is deceiving because they have played Oklahoma, TCU, and Iowa, all talented teams already. So Akron could be a very good team still. Ulysses Gilbert, their star linebacker, I could see him playing on Sundays. But it's going to be tough because even though Miami, Ohio is 1-4, they showed so much promise against Western Michigan last week. They had a 2-possession lead late in the game, but Western Michigan was able to come back and win that 40-39. So I think this one could actually be a toss-up. Akron hasn't played in a week since they had to bye, their second bye of the year, because of the Nebraska Lightning delay. So Miami-Akron's going to be an interesting game, but I think the Zips will get it. Cato Nelson's developed a lot as a quarterback this year, and I think Akron's defense will be able to limit Miami, Ohio's offense, which is missing their star receiver, James Gardner, for the year.
So I'm going to take a little exception with the Northern Illinois defensive comment. So when you say they have one of the best defenses in the country, are we taking into account opponent, meaning at their level they have one of the best defenses in the country? But if we lined up all the defenses in the country and we started with whoever that would be, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, whoever is the best defense in the country, LSU, etc., those are and then we went down through the rankings, they would not have one of the best defenses in the country if they played an SEC or Big Ten schedule.
Last year, the defense did show up against Boston College and Nebraska, forced lots of sacks in those games. Sutton Smith, he was terrorizing those defensive lines. And I'm factoring a lot of this from last year. And the fact if you look at early scores of Northern Illinois games, the Huskies almost always start by just limiting opponents defensively at the beginning. The Iowa game that they lost 33-7 was 3-0 at halftime.
Mm-hmm.
But you can only record so many stops because the offense isn't doing anything. And then the defense is getting gassed because it's the offense's fault. I honestly think it is NIU's offense's incompetence's fault that they're giving up all these second half points, because they're giving their defense more possessions to be on the field. They're giving them more energy wasted just because the offense goes 3 and out so much. So I think that NIU still has one of the better defenses in the nation. They have a lot of talent, especially within their front seven. The offense just isn't doing anything to help, because I think football is just an overall team sport, and I think the offense can contribute to how the defense performs if the offense does a good job, and vice versa. It goes both ways. And NIU's offense clearly isn't doing the job its defense has been doing, especially early on in games against teams like Iowa and Florida State and Utah.
Got Steve Helwick on the line talking MAC football right now. You can join him on Hustle Belt. It's the SB Nation platform for the MAC. And also he joined us to talk Texas and Oklahoma. So if you're joining us for the first time, or joining us, I should say, at this point in the live stream, we've been talking for an hour and a half. So we've covered Miami, Florida State, Texas, Oklahoma, and now the MAC. So wait until the video processes and posts to my channel, and then just back it up and watch the whole thing. All right. The commentary that I would like to hit on with the Nebraska theme is Scott Frost was in a position in which it looks silly now to think about them competing for a Big Ten Western Division championship. But at the time, they had yet to play a game. So he would look silly at the time saying, yeah, we'll play the first Saturday of December when there's a Big Ten championship game. And at that point in the season, he had yet to play a Big Ten game. And I'm sure Nebraska fans would have taken some exception to that, thinking, do you mean that we have no chance of playing in the Big Ten championship game, that you're willing to just take another game and fill the schedule out the day that the Big Ten title game is being played?
Well, here's the thing: is this didn't happen when Nebraska was 0-0. This happened when Nebraska was 0-2 with a loss to Troy already.
Troy in Colorado. So they were still
no Big Ten teams, but I think losing to Troy and Colorado, I know Colorado's undefeated, but their opponents have a combined record of 1-16, including their FCS opponent, with that one win being Colorado State over Arkansas. But besides that, Nebraska lost games to Colorado and Troy, both at home. I don't think that's any sign that they're going to be above Wisconsin or Iowa or even Northwestern or Purdue in the conference. And I think you can always scrap those games that you reschedule if you make the conference championship. I think it could be conditional, because I know Iowa State scheduled one against an FCS team, I think was Incarnate Word. And they said that if we play for the Big 12 title game, then we will scrap this game against Incarnate Word. And I'm surprised Nebraska didn't do that. But then Akron's AD had the comment that they didn't want to compete at our level, which I thought was interesting, because that was right after Akron came off an upset road win over Northwestern, where they had 3 defensive touchdowns and just stunned the nation, I think, getting their first Big Ten win since 1894, when Grover Cleveland was president and John Heisman was coaching Akron. So a long time ago. So I thought that was just an interesting set of events that happened, with Nebraska being 0-2. Akron was undefeated at the time with a win over Northwestern, and then Akron's AD calling out Nebraska for scheduling Bethune-Cookman, an FCS team that they'll get a surefire win. Could be their first win of the season, instead of facing an Akron team that could – but we wouldn't be surprised if they pulled off that upset at this point. It's not even an upset, maybe.
We're getting a history lesson here from Steve Helwick. I don't know what college football programs or podcasts that you would come across and hear the name Grover Cleveland or John Heisman even. Obviously, we know John Heisman and his greatness as the forerunner and the namesake of the great Heisman Trophy, the most prestigious award in sports. Steve joins us to talk MAC. So before we let you go, Steve, one question about MAC football in regards to what you've seen thus far versus what you expected to see, looking at your predictions and previews on this conference. What has surprised you? What has stood out as maybe something you didn't expect thus far?
I think one of the biggest surprises is the Ohio Bobcats. Looking into the season, I saw their non-conference schedule. You have Howard of the FCS, then you have Virginia, Cincinnati, and UMass. I was thinking Ohio was a 4-0 with that schedule. I thought they were going to maybe finish 11-1, 10-2. They're coming off that dominant bowl win over UAB 9-4. Instead, Ohio is just 2-2. The defenses looked really bad, especially against Virginia, and nearly lost to that FCS team, Howard, only winning 38-32. They blew a 24-7 lead against Cincinnati. And then UMass, they were down 21-7, had to claw back from that. Still, 58-42 win looks great for the offense. Not sure the defensive coordinator is as pleased with that result. So I think the fact that Ohio was MAC favorites at MAC Media Day, and a lot of people thought the Bobcats were going to win their first conference title since 1968, and Frank Solich hasn't won a conference title yet, despite being the model of consistency in the conference, being there since the early 2000s and usually making a bowl game with about 7 to 9 wins. That Ohio hasn't performed up to the level that they were expected to yet. And then you take in the MAC West favorite NIU, they're 2-3, but then again, they played Iowa, Utah, Florida State, and they still have BYU on that non-conference schedule of death, as I coined the term. So the fact that the MAC favorites are a combined 4-5 midway through the season is very interesting. While Buffalo looked to be the best team, except they lost 42-13 to Army, but I still think the Bulls are the front runners and the most dynamic team in the conference after what we've seen so far. But I would definitely say that the fall of Ohio, just being a mediocre 2-2 after one of the easier non-conference schedules in the nation. I mean, I did not expect Cincinnati to be this good going into the season, but Luke Fickell's worked wonders on that defense. Desmond Ridder, Michael Warren, the offense is finally looking intact, and we have a new era of Bearcats football. But Ohio still led them 24-7, and that's not a game you can lose. And Virginia is a Power 5 opponent that almost every Group of 5 opponent that wants to be a conference champion should be able to beat. You saw Navy beat them 49-7 in their bowl game last year. You should beat Virginia if you're a Group of 5 team wanting to win your conference.
All right, Steve Helwick on the line from Hustle Belt. It's the SB Nation platform for the MAC, and also he writes for the Daily Texan and does work there at the campus cable station for the University of Texas, talking Texas, Oklahoma. So if you missed Texas, Oklahoma talk, the MAC, or Florida State, Miami, then you just wait for the live stream to post. You stay right here on the live stream. Join the chat. It's the best live chat in college football, bar none. You join the chat, and then you wait for the video to process and post, and then you watch the rest that you missed. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Should be a good weekend.
Excellent. Good stuff. Steve Helwick, Daily Texan, Hustle Belt, and the University of Texas campus cable station. This is Mark Rogers TV, of course, the voice of college football. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and you can take part in the best live chat room in college football. As I just became aware of this as it was told to me by the folks in the live chat tonight, that they are the best live chat in the nation. And that doesn't surprise me because they keep me entertained each and every night. So the goal for me is to put so many people in the live chat that you guys are just chatting amongst yourselves and I can't even keep up with and address the live chat. And we've got plenty of the usual suspects in the live chat tonight, but also Flat Earth Deacon, a guy that I've yet to see in the live chat. So as I ask each and every night that I do a live stream and have a number of new folks in the live chat or people that at least I haven't been familiar with, let us know who you root for and how long you've been watching Mark Rogers TV. And you also know that we are adding 2 helmets back here. We ran a contest from September 15th through October 1st, and the winners are Miami and Oklahoma. But I will probably purchase more. But I guarantee Miami has a spot and Oklahoma on the set display back here to join Ohio State, Clemson, Washington, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. All right, everyone. It's 860-325-3687. 860-325-3687 is your number if you'd like to call in and talk some college football. Otherwise, I'm going to run through week 6. And let's understand as we look at the lines for week 6 and look at where we stand that I've been tracking this over the first 5 weeks of the season. 84 predictions from me. And that's 84 predictions against the spread. It must actually be 85 predictions against the spread. That doesn't sound right because I am 60-45 against the spread. That's 105 games. But leading into last week, let's go there. Leading into last week, that's where this number comes from. 21 of the 84 games I had predicted were outright upsets, meaning the team that was the Vegas dog won the game outright. So 1/4 of the time, the underdog wins. Last week in week 5, we had 3 such matchups. So I predicted 23 games. I won at 21 of 23 straight up. I picked 21 right, 2 wrong. Against the spread, 17 right and 6 wrong. That's pretty good. Against the spread, 17 right, 6 wrong. And then I picked a few upsets. But the 3 upsets that came through last week were Florida +7 against Mississippi State. Gators won the game. Virginia Tech at Duke, that line fluctuated from between 4.5 and 6, and Virginia Tech won on the road at Duke 31-14, as I predicted. I also picked Florida to beat Mississippi State. And then Kentucky is a slight 1 to 2 point underdog at home against South Carolina. The Wildcats won it 24-10. Of course, Penn State came awfully close as a 4-point underdog against Ohio State. But those were the 3 upsets out of 23 games last week. Florida +7 wins, Virginia Tech +4.5 to 6, and also, again, Kentucky at +2 won that game. So that leaves us with 105 games predicted this year and 24 upsets. 24 out of 105. That's roughly over 20% of the games are upsets. So I ask you this. Where are the upsets this week? We have had anywhere from 3 to 6 upsets every week out of all the top 25 games, plus some of the other games that I add that are relevant. So I pick all the top 25 games, plus the games that are relevant outside the top 25. For example, North Carolina State, Virginia, I picked that game this past week. Washington State, Utah, I picked that game outside the top 25. So look at the top 25 games this week and look at the games that are relevant outside the top 25 and find the upsets for me. There have been 3 to 6 each and every week. Buckeye State Sports tells us Kentucky upsets A&M. I don't know what the line is. I'll have to look at the line. First, I'm going to give you some of the key games for week 6. We'll discuss the key games for week 6. And also, I'm going to look at the lines, and we'll knock those out here in just a second. West End is telling us that the ACC in bowl play since 2014, the first year of the college football playoff, has been 4-7, 4-6, 8-3, and 8-3. I think you should count up West End for the 2016 results again. I'm almost positive the ACC went 10-3 if you count the 2 playoff games from Clemson. Maybe those are the 2 games that you missed. Clemson, of course, won the national championship that year. Therefore, they beat Ohio State and Alabama. This week, folks, we've got Alabama going to Arkansas. We've got Texas, Oklahoma, of course. Maryland at Michigan. Northwestern goes to Michigan State. Interesting game there. Mizzou at South Carolina. Boston College at North Carolina State. And BC, it was announced today, maybe without star running back A.J. Dillon. Dillon has a left ankle injury. He's questionable at best at this point as Boston College takes on North Carolina State on the road. A.J. Dillon is 3rd in the nation in rushing at 652 yards per game. Clemson and Wake Forest. We saw the Tigers struggle at home against Syracuse. If we can liken Wake Forest and Syracuse, and also Clemson factoring in that they've got to go on the road, maybe that's an interesting game. Wake Forest hosting Clemson. LSU at Florida. That's a big one. I will have to watch that one. Miami hosting Florida State as we lined up with Cam Underwood from State of the U. Kentucky at Texas A&M, as Buckeye State Sports tells us. He likes Kentucky to win on the road at A&M. Nebraska, Wisconsin certainly looks good in terms of the logos and the brand names, and that's been a key matchup in the Big Ten Western Division since Nebraska joined. Nebraska at Wisconsin doesn't seem to be a fair fight this year. Notre Dame at Virginia Tech. Notre Dame is passing the ball extremely well since Ian Book took over for Brandon Wimbush. And the Notre Dame offense has been completely transformed, scoring 56 points against Wake Forest, 38 last weekend against Stanford. Of both games, the Notre Dame offense racked up about 550 yards of total offense in those games, as Ian Book has looked spectacular, throwing 6 touchdowns against the no picks the last 2 weeks. Notre Dame at Virginia Tech, and of course the Hokies secondary has been suspect, specifically in that loss against Old Dominion. Virginia Tech is giving up the 8th most pass yards in the nation, and they face Ian Book and a fleet set of wide receivers at Notre Dame, led by this past weekend. Miles Boykin had 11 catches and a $144 through the air for the Irish. And at late night in the Pac-12, Utah taking on Stanford, a couple teams that have lost 1 game in the Pac-12, with actually Utah losing inside the conference to Washington at home a couple weeks ago. Stanford has yet to lose in the Pac-12. They lost, of course, to Notre Dame, getting dominated in the fourth quarter by the Irish. All right. Let's look at the lines of these games and see what you guys think, and I'll let you know what I think. Of course, my predictions will come out later this week. I'm hot. 17-6 against the spread. 60-45 against the spread, I believe, is about 57% this season. That ranks me right about where I typically am, right in that 57-58% range against the spread. And that's picking all the games. Now, if I could pick and choose, I think I would do a bit better. I got burned by Bama, -49 against Louisiana last week. The Tide led 56-0, and then they gave up 2 late touchdowns, and I lost that one. The other big spreads, Arkansas, Texas A&M, I wavered on that one. I finally took the Aggies -21. They only won by a touchdown, but that was just a bad pick. Arkansas played well. The other big point spreads in this one, of course, Northwestern was a 14.5-point dog at home against Michigan, and they almost won the game. They led 17-0 in that one. And Washington, a 17-point favorite against BYU. They covered. Oklahoma, 27.5-point favorite. Check that, 23.5-point favorite against Baylor. Oklahoma covered. Got that one right. Auburn, -27 against Southern Miss. They kind of slopped their way to an 11-point win, and there were weather issues on the plains, so that was the deal there. Navy Thomas A tells us that Wisconsin going to kick Nebraska's ass, but 22.5 points, not quite so sure about that. And that's always the trick from Vegas, Navy Thomas, is they want us to not be sure. And 22.5, yeah, that certainly seems on the border. This could be a game where Wisconsin is winning 42-10 in the fourth quarter, but they give up 10 more points on a field goal and a touchdown late in the game, and they win 42-20. That's what happens. Ricky says Nebraska is predicted to go 2-10 in the FBI. So that's the Football Power Index has the Huskers at 2-10. So right now they're 0-4. So that's 2-6 the rest of the way. They, of course, have the Bethune-Cookman game. Ding! There's a win. The other win you would think would be against nobody in the Big Ten Eastern Division. Nebraska got totally screwed by their Big Ten Eastern Division schedule with Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State. I get worked up about these schedules. It's just so stupid that Nebraska faces the 3 of the 4 best teams in the other division. There should be nobody facing all 3 of the best or all 3 of the 4 best teams in the Big Ten Eastern Division from the West, nor should anybody be missing all of them. And you have both circumstances. The schedulers should be smart enough to be able to look at last year's results and determine this is a fair schedule. Of course, you play everyone in your division, then you play in the Big Ten 3 teams from the other division. There should not be a team like Nebraska playing Michigan, Michigan State, and Ohio State. And then another team, I don't know who it is, but I went through all these logistics and theatrics during the off season. You may have seen those videos. I went through and I corrected the scheduling, but there's a team in the Big Ten Western Division that doesn't play any of the 4 good teams. They play Maryland, Rutgers, and Indiana. So the disparity in competing for a championship is just obvious. So again, back to Ricky's point, Bethune-Cookman would be the obvious choice for a Nebraska win, and then it's either Illinois or maybe Minnesota that Nebraska gets that second win. That's according to the Football Power Index. They've already played Purdue. They've got Iowa at the end of the season. They've got Wisconsin coming up this week. We wouldn't expect them to win either of those games. We would not expect Nebraska to beat any of the Big Ten Eastern Division teams, although I will say, next to the last game of the season, Michigan State travels to Lincoln. Go back to 2015, the year that Michigan State won the Big Ten, went to the college football playoff. They didn't lose to Penn State. They didn't lose to Michigan. They didn't lose to Ohio State. They lost to a 5-7 Nebraska team in Lincoln. Scott Frost is going to improve this team. This team is going to get better week to week. Most notably, this team is going to get better between the Iowa game and week 1 of next season. I expect Nebraska to be drastically improved for next season. That doesn't mean they're going to win the Big Ten championship. I mean that they're going to go from 3-9 to 6-6, something like that, 7-5. We'll have to wait until next year. But I'm also expecting improvement, not necessarily in wins and losses to be noticeable, but for Nebraska to be a much better team the last few weeks of the season than they are right now. Scott Frost is that good of a coach. I think he's going to make a difference in level of play. So don't be surprised if Nebraska scares Michigan State in Lincoln the second to the last week of the season. Okay. So those are the games right now, and Buckeye State Sports likes an upset with Kentucky going to Texas A&M and upsetting the Aggies. Bama at Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Maryland at Michigan, Northwestern Michigan State, Mizzou at South Carolina, BC at NC State, Clemson, Wake, LSU at Florida, Florida State, Miami, Kentucky, Texas A&M, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, Utah, Stanford. All right. Buckeye State Sports, does the Big Ten actually have a rotation, or do they just draw names out of a hat? Ohio State has played Nebraska many years in a row, and it will continue to, but they haven't played Purdue in 5 years. You know, Buckeye State Sports, I knew that at one point, and I have kind of lost track of how they have decided that, because the other leagues are very obvious. You've got one rival. If you're Miami, you always play Florida State, and the other 6 teams rotate. So Miami this year plays Boston College. Last year they played Syracuse. It rotates. You play the other teams on a rotational basis, but you have the one designated rival. In the Big Ten, there are no designated rivals, except they had to split up Indiana and Purdue in separate divisions. That's the old Oak and Bucket game. That has to be played each and every year. That is a staple standard Big Ten rivalry. So the old Oak and Bucket Purdue-Indiana game is always played. So that is the one set rivalry. And that is one of the reasons why I don't believe that the SEC and the ACC have to play these made-up rivalries. Stick to the rivalries outside of division play. That's fine. Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Auburn, LSU, Florida. Play those games. The rest of them, get rid of. The SEC is trying to establish Arkansas and Mizzou as a Friday after Thanksgiving rivalry game, and that's fine because of the proximity. I'm good with that. So keep that game. But there is no reason that Ole Miss and Vandy should be playing every year. There is no reason Mississippi State and Kentucky play every year. There's no reason that Texas A&M and South Carolina. Texas A&M and South Carolina are designated rivals in the SEC. It's just idiotic. Keep the rivals, keep those games intact, and then work it out from there. For those of you who have not heard my scheduling system, I'm not going to go through it right now. That's an off-season project, but I've set it all up in all the major conferences, the Big 12 aside, because everybody plays everybody. That's the only option they have right now. But elsewhere, I have leveled out the playing field, and I have determined a playoff or scheduling format that makes sense. Ricky, I think that the Buckeyes and the Illini still play for the Illabuck. They just don't play it for it every year. That's the Illini Buckeye trophy, the Illabuck, the turtle. What do you guys think about Notre Dame qualifying for college football playoff? We've only played 5 games. We do have 7 to go, and we have the tougher games to go, generally speaking. Ohio State's undefeated. Clemson's undefeated. Georgia and Alabama are undefeated. LSU's undefeated. So somebody out of the West could go to the SEC title game undefeated and meet an undefeated Georgia team. Oklahoma's not lost a game. And of course, in the Pac-12, everybody is lost now. So Navy Thomas 8's asking about a 13th data point, which I think should be, rightfully so, a disadvantage for Notre Dame. They are not going to play a 13th game. That 13th game exposes all those other teams to a loss that will knock them out of the playoff against what is most likely the second best team in the conference. Or if not, even if the conferences are imbalanced, the divisions, it's still one of the best teams in the conference. So Ohio State's going to line up against a good Wisconsin team, and Alabama and Georgia are going to have to fight it out. And say what you will about Clemson being the class of the ACC, they still have to line up a 13th time and take on a good Miami team or Virginia Tech or Duke, somebody. Heck, if they're playing Virginia, they're at least playing somebody to gain a 13th game and the possibility of being upset and losing and getting knocked out of the playoffs. I am a defender of Notre Dame's schedule in part because it's extremely tough, but they don't play the final game. Why does Notre Dame always play Stanford? Football Fanatic 28. Football Fanatic 28, this is the first time I've seen your handle on the chat. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We bring on the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry, and you get analysis from me, and you get to hear from the callers. Calling in right now. The number is 860-325-3687. This is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's 28AD28.
Oh, man, this is the first time you've called, right?
No, the second time.
Oh, the second time. My apologies there, because I certainly enjoy your comments in the live chat. Yeah, you're a great supporter. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem, Mark. I love the channel, man. Love the channel. You're doing unbelievable work.
Appreciate that. What's on your mind tonight?
Mark, I just want to comment on the 13th data point in Notre Dame. I don't feel like Notre Dame needs a 13th data point. I think the committee has already sort of made its bed when Oklahoma in 2015 did not have a 13th data point, but got in the playoff. And then Ohio State did not have a 13th data point in 2016 and got in the playoff. Bama did not have a 13th data point in 2017 and got in the playoff. So now to tell Notre Dame that you need a 13th data point, it's not consistent.
Absolutely. So I think we need to distinguish something anytime we get into these kind of hypothetical situations and we talk about different scenarios. So there's a difference between talking about what should be and what will be. So sometimes I think we mix that up. And some people are arguing this is unfair or this is unjust. This is the way it should be done. And other people are projecting what the committee will do. So there's a mixed up argument. So are you just basically looking at history and saying there doesn't need to be a 13th data point? There's already been precedent set for just having 12 games played and a team making the playoffs. So this is what Notre Dame is not facing this season, is this fictitious, you got to have a 13th data point? Or are you saying it doesn't matter to you?
I'm saying that it shouldn't matter to the committee because they've already set precedents. And even to make it worse, those other teams that made, well, Oklahoma did in 2015 because they didn't have a championship game. But in 16 and 17, there were 13 data points available to those teams. And if they're going to make that a criteria, those teams weren't good enough to make their 13th data point. They didn't get to their conference championship game. They didn't win their division, but they got in the playoffs anyways. So now to come back and look at Notre Dame and hold a 13th data point over their head would be kind of like, it would be inconsistent.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I'm just saying if I were the person in position of power, first of all, we wouldn't have 4 playoff teams because we have 5 conferences. So it's already screwed up in my book. I've said that from day one. I've already said day one, you've got a screwed up playoff system if you've got 5 conferences and you've got 4 playoff spots. That would like the NFL setting up a league where they have 8 divisions like they do now and saying, we're going to have 7, we're going to have a 6-team playoff. We've got 8 divisions. So you've already messed it up. And especially in the NFL, you would actually have more justice in setting up a situation like that because these teams overlap and they all play each other. But in college football, as you well know, there's very little overlap. So if anything is justified, it's that a conference champion, having proven to be the best team in their conference, should, regardless of perception, regardless of maybe a bad game outside of the conference, should represent the conference and get to the playoff, in my opinion. But we don't have that system. So we've got to squeeze 5 conferences into 4 spots. And then that doesn't even take into account a conference that's extremely strong, like what we saw last year, where I think it was obvious that the SEC had 2 of the 4 best teams, especially the way it played out. And number 2, we haven't had to deal with Notre Dame yet. They've knocked themselves out of the playoff each and every year to date. It looks like that may not happen this year. So we may have another conference out of play. And then what happens if the SEC really deals this a wild card with the expected undefeated championship game, and somebody loses a close game and you've got undefeated Alabama at 14-0, or what would it be, 13-0, and you've got Georgia at 12-1, having just lost to the number 1 team by a field goal. And then you got a real mess.
True. Yeah, and that I don't think it'll come to that, just because I think, and you know how the game's played.
Sure.
This thing works itself out every year. Around this time of year, we're all up in arms, and this team can't lose because if you lose a game, you're not going to go to the playoff. Clemson fans are saying they need to go undefeated. Oklahoma fans are saying they need to go undefeated. Nobody's going to. Most of the time, nobody does go undefeated.
I think there's only been 3 teams. We've only had 3 teams. We had Florida State in 2014. We had Clemson in 2015. We had Alabama in 2016 go undefeated. So we've had 4 years of this. We've had 4 teams each year. So we've had 16 teams make the playoffs, and 13 of them had 1 loss and 3 had 0 losses. And no 2-loss team obviously has made the playoffs.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. I think we get worked up about this time of year. Everybody gets nervous and starts projecting. We better win out, otherwise we're not going to get in. I think in all likelihood, everybody may drop a game. And then it comes down to resume and other political stuff, I think.
So it also matters who you lose to. So I just had a friend today say, man, it's a great thing that this is an Ohio State fan speaking. Wow, we were lucky to win that game. That would have been huge. That probably would have knocked us out of the playoffs. And I said, well, you can look at that 2 ways. You can look at that in terms of the one loss does not knock any team, especially the caliber of Ohio State, out of the playoff. But you did lose to the wrong team. If you would have lost that game, that would have been to the wrong team, most likely, as Penn State is considered the second best team. That has yet to be decided. But let's say they are the second best team in the Big Ten. Had Penn State won that game, obviously Ohio State then needs Penn State to lose twice to get to the Big Ten championship game. And we've seen that play both ways. We saw in 2015 an Ohio State team get left out of the playoff because they couldn't get to the Big Ten championship game because they lost to the wrong team. When you think about that, Ohio State could have suffered a much worse loss. They could have lost to Rutgers that year. As long as they beat Michigan State, they would have had the head-to-head. They would have went to the Big Ten championship game with a loss to Rutgers. But they lost to the wrong team. Alabama didn't lose to the wrong team. They lost to Ole Miss. Ole Miss lost other games. Alabama still went to the SEC title game. But, of course, go right ahead.
Oh, I'm going to say it's funny because last year they sort of did lose to the wrong team. But in the eyes of the committee, it wasn't long enough.
You mean Alabama did?
Auburn, so Auburn, Alabama boxed them out, or Auburn boxed them out of the championship game, but then they got in anyway.
Yeah, I had an argument with somebody on here, Mike Laval. You've probably seen him on here, Tennessee guy. Does a great job. But we have some contention over scheduling and the playoff system that he just thinks is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I let him know that one of the games that we look at as college football fans as being one of the most important games of the season is Alabama and Auburn, and the game was utterly useless. It was meaningless. If anything, it benefited the team that lost. It kept them home and healthy and did not expose them to an opportunity to lose another game. And it sent the winner up against one of the best teams in the country to have to repeat a win that they just won a couple weeks earlier. So it benefited the loser, and it punished the winner.
Right. Yeah. Congratulations. Now you get to go play Georgia.
Yeah. You got to go beat Georgia again. Alabama, here's your advantage of losing this game is we're still going to select you for the playoff, and you don't have to expose yourself to playing one of the best teams in the country at a neutral site.
Yeah, I actually like and I'm probably in the minority here, but I actually like the BCS better than the playoff.
So
because at least the early iterations of the BCS, because I live in Ohio.
Okay.
So in Ohio, the high school football has a playoff system where you have to beat certain teams, and if you beat enough teams, you get enough points. You can be 5-5 and make the playoffs if you beat enough good teams. And somebody else can be 10-0 and miss the playoffs because they didn't beat anybody.
Yep.
In the earlier iterations of the BCS, I think that it was scheduled more like that. You had points that you got for beating whomever. And then when certain teams started getting left out, like USC got left out in 2003, I think Auburn got left out in 2004. Then we started moving away from the hard computer line and started going more towards letting the humans have more say. And now we've gotten rid of the BCS entirely, and now we have this. And my problem with this is that it's too human-driven. It's entirely too human-driven.
It's all human-driven.
Yes. And so you bring in all the bias. I want this team in because this team's going to make me the most money. When one team loses, like for instance, Oklahoma and Texas this week. I'll be an OU fan. It bugs me anyways anytime we lose to Texas. But if we lose this week, it'll be a 7 versus 19 matchup. If Texas beats us on the last-second field goal, Texas is going to shoot from 19 up to 11. We're going to go from 7 back to 13 or 14. This week in the Big Ten, Ohio State played Penn State. Ohio State wins that game and moves up. Penn State loses, though, and moves back 2 spots. So we would drop 7 or 8 if we lose. Penn State drops 2 when they lose. And it would be the same thing. If Texas beat us on the last-second field goal, we're going to drop 7 or 8 spots.
And so that's a great point because we rely too much on humans' rankings. So there's a perception that Penn State's better than Texas. Therefore, Penn State losing to Ohio State is not factored in, and Penn State's not penalized much.
Right. And I even think game control, and I'm sure they supposedly look at game control, but to me that's a terrible loss for Penn State. They're up by 12 points with 8 minutes to go in the game, and you got them pinned at the 1 yard line. They're up by 12 points at home.
Sure, but you got to
score 14 points on you the whole night.
You got to look at the totality of the performance, though. You've got to look at the totality of the performance. They played well enough to get a 12-point lead. They played arguably the best team in the country, and they gained a 12-point advantage. So they played extremely well. Yes, they blew it, but in totality, they played what may turn out. I think most of us would agree that Ohio State, at very least, is one of the 5 or 6 best teams in the country, and they played them within a point. They outplayed them in the first half noticeably, and they played them within a point. So I do think so do you agree that the performance, not just the result, but the performance should matter? So if Penn State loses that game 38-0, they should be penalized much harsher than if they lose by 1. Correct?
I would say in certain cases.
Oh, really? Only in certain cases? Aren't we in a system where we've got to judge performance because they don't play enough games against each other? We've got to judge the performance.
Yeah, I still feel like the game itself,
okay,
in the totality of the performance is true. But I feel like if you've got a 12-point lead at home with 8 minutes left and your opponent's pinned on the 1 yard line, that's not a game you're supposed to lose. And
of course not.
You have to be held accountable for, quote, choking and blowing a game. So there's no penalty for them choking that game away or blowing that game.
So you would be better.
2 touchdowns this week.
You would be better with Penn State losing that game by 17 points. They just, from start to finish, they were always 2 or 3 scores down. They lost 34-17. You would penalize that effort not as harshly as them blowing the game in which they outplayed Ohio State most of the way.
I wouldn't be better with it, but I would probably punish them worse. But I still think you need to be punished. I think losing and dropping 2 spots, going from 9 to 11, you don't move anybody. And that's how the top 10. That's how the top 10 ends up with the same chalk teams, because even when they lose, they don't drop.
So I kind of tout my top 25 as making sense, but you still have to make assumptions. There still have to be assumptions made, or you don't have rankings. They just don't play enough games and don't play each other enough. So that you do, like after week 1, if I rank Notre Dame number 5 because they beat Michigan, I'm assuming Michigan's probably about as good as we think they are. That assumption has to be made to some extent. So in this case, let's apply it to Ohio State, Penn State. They came in ranked 4th and 9th. So what is the 9th?
Okay.
Let's say those rankings are, God came down and told us, you've got the rankings perfect. They're exactly, Ohio State's the 4th best team in the country and Penn State's number 9. What is the 9th best team in the country supposed to do against the 4th best team in the country? Shouldn't they, at home, play them really tough and then lose? So they pretty much did what they should do. Why are they now the 12th best team in the country? Wouldn't the 9th best team in the country take the 4th best team to the wire at home and lose? Doesn't that seem reasonable? I'm somewhat playing devil's advocate, because if Penn State played 3 or 4 games like that in a row, if for some reason they had to play their toughest games all in a row and they just kept losing them by 1 point, we wouldn't reward that and say, well, yeah, you can stay at number 9 and you're 3-3 now. Of course, you can't do that. So I'm just playing devil's advocate in terms of they did perform like the number 9 team in the country, didn't they?
I don't know. I don't know if the number 9 team in the country blows a 2-score lead, even to number 4. Is there that big of a gap between number 4 and number 9?
That's a great question. I think sometimes there is, and sometimes there's not.
If you had to play that game again, and we're going to go back to 8 minutes, we're going to freeze the game and start right back at that point again.
Yep.
How good would you feel about coming back and winning that game again?
As an Ohio State fan?
As an Ohio State fan.
Well, I'm kind of a glass half full kind of guy. I thought they were going to win the game. Like I was watching that game thinking, I was worried. Obviously, you're concerned because, time's ticking down, and a capable team should hold a 12-point lead with 8 minutes left. You're completely correct, especially when their punter pins you to the 4-yard line on the last possession of the game. You should win that game. Yes.
Sure.
You should win that game.
Yeah, I wish the system was a little bit different. I feel the same way, when you talk about having the 4 best teams.
Yep.
To me, like Alabama, for instance, Alabama is always going to be one of the 4 best teams. If you look at them on paper, Alabama can lose 3 games, and if they were out of the playoff, let's say Alabama loses 3 games for some reason. Last week of the season, ESPN would probably put up a graphic that says Las Vegas just put something out today that says if Alabama was playing 4 playoff teams, they'd be favored by a field goal over every single one of them.
Yes.
Alabama's always one of the best 4 teams. Just on paper, they're always one of the best 4 teams. So at what point would they not make a playoff?
The
Even
last
with 2 losses, I think they would. Or go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, yeah, I'm thinking back, and the last time that Alabama would not be considered by most college football fans, including myself, as one of the 4 best teams in the country would have been Nick Saban's first season. Even by his second season, they went to number 1 in the country. They lost the SEC title game to Florida, and then some people would consider the Sugar Bowl to be somewhat insignificant, although they did lose to Utah. So that might have been that one's on the border, top 4 team. But after that, yes, even to your point, in 2010, they lost 3 games. They went 9-3, and it was a head scratcher as to how that team lost 3 games, but they did. And they went and played a top 5 Michigan State team in the Capital One Bowl, and they beat them 49-7. And they were a huge favorite. They were like a 13-point favorite. To your point, they were playing an 11-1 Michigan State team, and they were a 13-point favorite as a 9-3 team.
Wow.
So you're right.
And then to win by 42 points, they're a machine. They're just, to me, they're playing at a completely different level. I don't even know how you really match up to some degree. And even then, they can have their off day and they can lose a game. But when I look at how they recruit, when I look at Saban and the system and how driven that guy is, I just think they're on a different level right now. I hope they come back to the pack at some point, because I'd like to have my squad have a chance to win a championship at some point. But right now, they're the gold standard for sure.
Well, nobody gave your squad a chance in the 2014 Sugar Bowl. You were a 2-touchdown underdog, and you went out there and took care of business.
Yeah, one of my favorite games. One of my favorite games, for sure.
The only thing, I don't want to drag us back 20 years, 28, but I'm just going to say one thing about the BCS. So I was an ardent critic of the SEC, or of the BCS. I used to blast the BCS all the time. But I do understand your point about, let's put it in the hands of computers and logic and the results on the field, and let's come up with a system that takes the human bias out of it. And that's what we had to a certain extent. And then by the time the formula was in its last version, we had 2/3 human vote and 1/3 computer. The argument I would have against the computers, though, is they don't have enough data to go by. This isn't a Major League Baseball season. I often argued, and people, until they heard me out, would think I was crazy, because I said, you know what sport should institute the BCS? It's Major League Baseball, because they have the most data to go by. So the BCS system for them would be infallible. They should just skip the playoffs and send 2 teams to the World Series, because the data's, they've got 162 games between, they've got like 2,500 games to go by, so they can load up all sorts of data and tell you who the best teams are. Versus college football, we're comparing teams that don't even play teams that played each other, not even 2 or 3 degrees of separation. So the one knock I'll make on the BCS, in addition to that, is just, this will be a series that maybe 12 people will watch, but I'll have a whole lot of fun cutting it, is I'm going to go year by year through the BCS and point out the missteps and the inconsistencies and the failures of the BCS. And I'll just point out year number 1. So you had Tennessee going undefeated in 1998. And if you watch the games, most people would not have considered Tennessee to be the best team in the country. They escaped week after week after week. But to their credit, they did. So they won the games in arguably the best conference in America. The problem was, who should they have played? Ohio State, Wisconsin, Florida State, Arizona, UCLA. Did I get to 6 teams? Kansas State, all lost one game. 6 teams lost one game. They all went 11-1. How do you separate 6 teams of that caliber? We're not talking about one of them was BYU or Central Florida. They were all Power 5 one-loss teams. How do you separate those teams and decide who plays Tennessee for the national title?
Wow. So the computer, I guess, whatever criteria they use for the computer, spit back
Florida State. And ironically,
okay,
they had the ugliest loss of the 6 teams. They lost to a 6-5 NC State team, 24-7. Ironically,
humans would never let you get away with that.
Exactly, because it was Ohio State 2017, 19 years in advance. Exactly.
Right.
But it's a great discussion, 288028. I appreciate you getting on the phone, and always appreciate your comments here.
No problem, Mark. Have a good evening. We'll chat with you again soon.
You too. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye-bye.
That's 288028. Big AP fan. You go AD all day, or AP, of course, Adrian Peterson, who's still churning out yardage for the Washington Redskins. Now, I don't know how fast he's churning it out these days, but he did have a nice little 12 or 13-yard run and a little flashback to glory in game number 1, I know, as we've got another call coming in. This is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, and we will now see who's on the line. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV. Who's on the line? I'm hearing myself. It's a lovely sound.
Okay, I just turned it down. This is Navy Thomas 8.
Hey, Tom.
I've had it, dude.
Uh-oh.
I've had it.
Oh, boy. Did I do something wrong? Navy Thomas keeps me in line. Okay.
The Big 12 does not have a real conference championship game because they only have, 10 teams?
10 teams.
Notre Dame has no conference that they're in.
I know that drives you nuts.
The original rules that they came out with was, it's the 13th data point for the conference championship game. Notre Dame doesn't play that. So Notre Dame, in my opinion, along with the Big 12, kicked them to the curb.
Okay, well, that was the issue with the Big 12 in year number 1 in 2014. And rightfully, Ohio State beat Wisconsin, won another game, gained entry into the playoff, and Baylor and TCU sat out because they didn't play a championship game. But now the Big 12 plays a championship game, but you have an issue with their championship game?
Yeah. They play a conference championship game where they have to play a team that they already played, remember?
Of course.
One conference, what's their motto? The true champions.
I'm gonna stand up for the Big 12 here, Navy Thomas. I'm gonna stand up for the Big 12, and I know that you've got an axe to grind there coming from the Big 12, but you do understand that they all play each other. It is the truest championship of the Power 5.
Okay, so why in the hell do they think that they need to have a conference championship game?
Because of what happened in 2014.
That they already have played.
Because of what you're stating. They want that 13th data point.
And Notre Dame doesn't have that 13th data point,
okay,
even though they play a tougher schedule than the Big 12 does.
Let's wrap up the Big 12 here real quick. We'll leave Notre Dame to the side. The only point I'm making here is that if you go to every conference, especially the worst culprits are the ACC and the SEC, because they've got 14 teams and they only play 8 games. Therefore, every team in that conference and those 2 conferences miss playing 5 teams from their own conference. And if you're talking Alabama, let's take Alabama, for example. They don't play Georgia. They don't play Kentucky. They don't play Missouri. They don't play South Carolina. They don't play a ton of good teams in their own conference. At least in the Big 12, we know that Oklahoma or whoever turns out to be the champion, they had to play everybody, the good teams and the bad, everybody. They played everybody. So that's the purity of the Big 12 situation. Now, it's not to their credit. They didn't even want it this way. They just got to this point because of teams leaving their league. They take credit for it, but that's not.
They went to this because TCU and Baylor both got kicked out in what, 2014?
They went to the champion. They decided to reinstate a championship game because of this. But they went to this 10-team or 9-game schedule by default. They had to because Nebraska left and A&M and Mizzou left, and so they had to.
No. You're missing my point. They had to go to this because they got kicked out of the conference or the
college football playoff. We're arguing two different things.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. That's why they went to a championship game. Yes, because they got left out in 2014. I'm talking about their schedule, their regular season schedule. By default, they've got 10 teams, so you've got 9 other games that you can play, and they just went to a 9-game schedule, so everybody plays everybody so that they can wave their hand and say, we play the most pure championship because everybody has to play everyone. And I agree with them, but that's not because of their wisdom or they have so much integrity. They were forced into that situation by teams leaving their league.
Okay.
They didn't do that before.
So now explain to me how Notre Dame can be so entitled to enter the college football playoff when they don't have the 13th data point.
Well, I would think that if it's close, if there is a close decision to be made between any one of the other contenders and Notre Dame, that any one of those contenders that won, especially if they won a conference championship, that should be a huge determining factor over Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame has to have a decided lead over the other contender for a 4th spot in a playoff, since they didn't win a conference and they didn't play a 13th game against a good team. So these teams are always, they're not just playing an extra game. They're going out there having to play Miami or Wisconsin or Georgia or somebody. So they've got to play a really good team in that 13th game.
One thing I want to establish, I don't want to say that Notre Dame isn't playing a tough schedule.
I totally understand. I'm right there with you.
It's that 13th data point that the college football playoff was Condoleezza Rice is the one that came out and said it. We need the 13th data point for a conference championship game. And then now suddenly, we're going to accept the Big 10 or the Big 12. We're going to accept Notre Dame. Okay, if you want to be an independent, fine, be an independent. Play the top-ranked other independent in the independent championship game. How about that?
Hey, I like that.
Play BYU.
Or play the best of the group of 5. Play Central Florida.
That would be fine with me also. Go play UCF.
Maybe that could be a stipulation.
I just get so spun up when I hear Notre Dame fans going, "Oh, well, we should be able to get into the college football playoff." But the college football playoff committee said they don't have the 13th data point.
I totally agree with you. So there used to be a stipulation in which, because Notre Dame didn't belong to a conference, if you looked at bowl projections and bowl seeding and placement, Notre Dame, if they met certain criteria, could go to a New Year's Day 6 or whatever it was called at the time. This is back in the BCS era. That Notre Dame, if they had to go 9-3 to go to the Gator Bowl, and there were all these stipulations because they didn't play in a conference. Every other conference just said we sent our first place team here and our second place team there. But because it was Notre Dame, they had all these crazy rules about they could do this and they couldn't do this. And so my point being that maybe we could set something up where if Notre Dame goes undefeated or maybe has one loss and meets a certain criteria, yes, they would have to play the top group of 5 team for that final spot in the playoff. But they would have to meet the...
I just think that would give them another edge where, okay, you get to go play the top group of 5 team or whatever scenario they want to come up with.
Yeah.
I don't buy it. I'm just like, Notre Dame, join a damn conference. I know you're part of the ACC, but
well,
you don't play an entire ACC schedule.
No, they play 5 instead of 8. So,
and
Tom, it is.
Personally, I think that's Bravo Sierra.
Yeah.
There, I kept it clean.
Well, Tom, are you still on the line?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Because some people are mentioning in the chat here that there are some other teams that didn't play a 13th game that were selected. So you had Oklahoma in 2015 before they had a championship game. They got picked. You have Ohio State, who didn't make the Big Ten title game in 2016, and you've got Alabama last year. So what do you think about those teams?
Well, I'm just going by the college football playoff rules that they came up with when they first when they first set it up. You have to win your conference. You have to have the 13th data point. Otherwise, you're not in. So they did it to Ohio State. What was that, last year or the year before with Penn State?
So, yes, Ohio State won the Big Ten last year, didn't make the playoff. The year before, they didn't win the Big Ten, but they got in the playoff.
But Penn State had how many losses that year?
Yeah, so that was totally, and people compare the 2016 scenario and the 2017, and I'm making the distinguishment that you're about to make. They're totally different circumstances in that Ohio State had a better record than Penn State. They also went on the road and beat Oklahoma. They had better better non-conference wins, and they had a better record than Penn State. So I didn't agree with Penn State being snubbed. I would have selected the Big Ten champion, Penn State, but I do understand a better resume and a better record was the selection for Ohio State.
But that's not part of the college football playoff committee's what they mouthed off. It was win your conference.
Yeah. Play a 13th game.
13th data point.
Yep.
And yet,
well,
we're talking about Notre Dame getting into the college football playoff.
What's amusing about all that
conference championship game.
What's amusing about all that, Tom, is that in 2014 it was you need to win a conference and you need to play the 13th game, and then in 2015 I'm trying to think something else happened and they came up with an excuse. So now they've gotten to the point where they've talked themselves into circles. They really can't stand on anything in particular, so they just say we select the 4 best teams. That's all they say now.
I just wanted to call in and chime in and say, Bravo Sierra.
All right, Tom. You have a good one, man.
All right, buddy.
All right.
Talk to you later. Great show.
Thank you so much. Man, Navy Thomas is the best. He has been here as a supporter for quite a long time. I might have had 50 subscribers. I'm not that big right now, but I had about 50 or 100, something probably in that range when Navy Thomas jumped on and started touting me and jumps on the live chat and comments all the time and has some great things to say, and follows me on Twitter. We follow each other, and pumps out the information, lets everybody know we're here. 860-325-3687. We've got another call coming in. We'll see who this is. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
What's up, Mark? It's Big Poppy.
Hey, Big Poppy. How are you?
Good. So finally, I've been dying to debate this with you for the longest.
Oh boy, here we go.
Get to do it.
Let's go. What do you got?
College football playoffs. Where do I begin? Last year, I'm going to start with the non-Power 5 schools. So UCF should have gotten in. And people say UCF didn't play nobody last year, but the last time I recall, they beat Memphis. And I believe Memphis finished the season ranked inside the top 25, correct?
Until they lost to Iowa State in the Liberty Bowl. They might have still stayed in the top 25. I think you're right. They did. I think they stayed in the last couple spots. Yes.
And not only did they beat them once, but they beat them twice in the conference championship game.
Okay.
And they beat USF. USF was ranked also.
Yep.
So I believe UCF should have gotten in. But Alabama, how many ranked teams did Alabama play last year?
LSU and Mississippi State. Those are the teams they beat. They lost to Auburn. So that's what it depends. What's your criteria? Ranked at the time of the game or ranked at the end of the season?
I would say ranked.
And that's difficult. I'm not trying to talk you into circles. That's a difficult one. I would say the same thing because you can make an argument. So the Bama supporters will say they beat the number 3 team in the country in game 1, Florida State. But the Bama detractors will say, well, Florida State crashed and burned. There was no reason for them to be number 3 in the country. They went 6-6.
I would say end of the season because I believe USF was ranked inside the top 25 because they beat Texas Tech in the Birmingham Bowl, and I believe Memphis was still ranked. I believe they were like either 24 or 25.
Yeah, I think so.
To end the season. So even then, I believe UCF should have gotten in. And if they don't get in this year and they end up running the table, I mean, I just feel the American Athletic Conference is a power. It should be considered a power conference because just look at the teams that have produced. Most of the teams that had came out of that conference won the championship, have knocked those teams that they played in the New Year's Six Bowls, the quote-unquote bigger schools, in the mouth. And it started a few years ago, back when Tom Herman, the current coach at Texas, when he was at Houston, it all started with that Houston team knocking Florida in the chin strap. No, they played an absolutely great game, and it's very, very good teams that come out of that conference. So I'm with the Athletic of American, the AAC conference, that they're calling themselves the Power Six, and I believe that's a power conference. So whatever playoff system you're going to describe to me, I feel it has to include the non-Power 5 schools and including that conference because that conference is no fraud. That is no fraud. That conference is legit, and I believe I don't know any team that from that conference that has went to a New Year's Six Bowl and has lost.
So I'm going to back you up even a year before that. In 2014, the first year of the playoff, Baylor and Central Florida played, and Central Florida beat Baylor. So they beat the Big 12 champion. Then, as you mentioned, Florida State and Houston faced off, and that was a blowout. Houston took care of them like 33-18. It wasn't even that close. And then, of course, the famous Central Florida-Auburn matchup last year. So they've gone to the New Year's Six 3 times, and they've shown up 3 times and won 3 games against Auburn, Baylor, and Florida State. Pretty impressive.
Oh, you know what other team we're forgetting, Mark? Louisville. Louisville is also a part of that conference where Charlie Strong was there, and they had Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah, so that was in 2013 or 2012 when they beat Florida in the Sugar Bowl.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was just going through the BCS era or the playoff era. So the problem, the one thing I'll mention, Big Poppy, though, is that I don't think anyone or few people have an issue with the top of the league. It's that it drops considerably. So if you go 7, 8, 9 teams deep in any of the major conferences, you're still running into Purdue or Arizona or Wake Forest or somebody who's capable. If you go 8 or 9 deep in the American Athletic Conference, then it gets really rough. So that's the problem.
But I feel like if they beat the best team at that, if they beat the best team and that team finished off ranked, that should count towards the resume, because that's how I just think that the college football playoff system is more biased towards the bigger name schools such as Ohio State, Clemson, Bama, because that's what I think is kind of based. I don't think the committee will come out and say it, but it's also, I think they take in the fact the name of the school. Like, it's like some people have some crazy conspiracy called the Nick Saban rule. Like, no matter as long as Alabama doesn't lose more than 2 games, they will get into the college football playoffs. And I just think it's just based on the school's brand and the name. Like, if this year UCF was to go undefeated and it was like a whole bunch of chaos, they will no doubt be in, because they have like their merchandise is selling. They're one of the most popular, maybe the most popular group of 5 school we have ever had in history of college football. And I believe they would get in not only because they'll be going undefeated. I'm just speaking in hypotheticals. I don't think they're going undefeated. I think they'll end up losing to USF. But just speaking in hypotheticals, I just think they take like some of the brand. I just feel like it's just they also incorporate how big a brand the school is, and you don't get that kind of vibe, Mark. I think I kind of do, because I'm still trying to figure out. I understand Ohio State didn't get in, but a few years ago, Penn State didn't get in. And I was arguing how Penn State didn't deserve to get in, but they lost twice. And then last year, I rethought about the situation because Auburn lost twice, but Auburn was about to get in, because at that point, Auburn was streaking and they were playing Georgia. If Auburn would have beaten Georgia, they would have lost twice, but they would have gotten in.
Absolutely. The argument that Ohio State shouldn't have gotten in because they lost twice is ridiculous from the people, mostly from the SEC, that are supporting a conference where the winner would have been Auburn with 2 losses. And they wouldn't have had any issue with that.
And Pac-12 people were trying to find some way to get USC involved. I just think it's like the college football playoffs is like how the Heisman Trophy voting is. The Heisman Trophy people vote for the guy from their conference and strictly their conference, and the people for the college football playoffs go for the teams that's in their conference. And I just think, like, I see expanding it, but expanding it, it has to be, if we just put every team that won a conference championship in there, it would be too long. But I think it has to be some
too
way
long.
I mean, think about all the people will say extend it to 8 teams, right?
Absolutely.
But even then, people are going to be mad because you have 18 playoffs, but then there's going to be one team that should have gotten inside that 18 playoffs. And then people are going to be like, spread it to a 12. I just think it's just going to be an ongoing thing. It's going to keep going and keep going. But I feel whatever people spread it to or whatever, I feel the group of 5 has to find some way to get a team in there, because UCF is one of the best teams in college football. It has to be some way to get a group of 5 team in that.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying,
all right, Big Papi, we got your point. Now let me make a point. We understand your point. You need a group of 5 team in the playoff. We've got 4 teams right now. We've got 4 teams that make the playoff. We've got 5 conferences, plus we could have a situation like we've had in the past almost, and looks like we might have this year with Notre Dame. Plus, we got group of 5. So we're crowding out conferences at this point, and we just don't have enough spots. So you're proposing, what's your playoff format? You just explain that to me. what would be your criteria for selecting playoff teams? And then I'm going to explain to you why it should be at least 8 teams and why there won't be any argument that, well, they're 9th and now we should expand to 12 or anything like that. I'll explain that to you in just a second. But first, I want you to tell me what your playoff criteria would be.
Well, I like the 14 college football playoffs, but if I had to, and it wasn't for 18, it would be strength of schedule, and it would be the quality wins and how big of a win you beat that opponent, and plus that opponent's record, that opponent's overall record. And like, for example, like for a group of 5 team, like I don't know if you watch college basketball or not, but it was a team named Loyola that had the Cinderella run in March Madness. I think I compared that team to what UCF was in college football last year. They they didn't play like a group of 5 school until the Auburn game, but Loyola, if UCF was to beat like a Power 5 school that was ranked in the top 25, I would include that. And Loyola beat Florida and Gonzaga, I believe. So I believe if UCF was to do something like that and they was to run the table, you would have to put them in, wouldn't it? You would have to put a group of 5 team in. Now, unless there's no really undefeated group of 5 teams, then don't put them in. But if it's a good group of 5 team that has a group resume and a good resume against the top 25 and meets my criteria, strength of schedule, and margin of victory, then they should be in. Now, the way the other teams will work will be just fill in the blank. Basically, like you have your 4 best teams. I don't know what you would do with those. I guess you would give them a bye. The most logical answer for that one would be to give at least 1 or 2 teams a bye. Well, 2 teams a bye, basically. And then I guess the rest would be playing games, basically. Now, I'm not really sold on the whole conference, winning a conference championship to get an automatic bid thingy. I feel the best 8 teams will get in, and most likely you wouldn't have to worry about a team winning the conference championship and not making it in, because most likely if a team wins a conference championship in a Power 5 conference, they most likely will be ranked in the top 10, basically.
We don't know who the best teams are. That's why we have to go by the resume. If we knew who the best teams are, we'd be God, and we would just throw in the 4 best teams. The committee, which says they choose the 4 best teams, if they knew who the 4 best teams were, that means they know who 1, 2, 3, and 4 are. They are 0-4 right now in selecting the number 1 seed to win a national title. If they were all-knowing, like they pretend to be, that they're selecting the 4 best teams, then they would place the number 1 team in the number 1 seed, and they would win the national championship, and they've never done that. So,
so basically, Alabama. So if Alabama was number 1 and the number 1 team didn't win the championship, you feel that's a strike against them?
No. It's not a strike against Bama. It's a strike against the system that they claim is so foolproof that they are selecting the 4 best teams. That's the only thing that so if you go back to my conversation with Navy Thomas, basically they started with a certain criteria in 2014, and then they kept opposing that. They kept violating what they had set in place to the point where now all they're telling us is we're going to select the 4 best teams. Well, obviously, that's a very vague criteria that nobody knows what that even means. We're going to select the 4 best teams. So if they're that smart that they can select the 4 best teams, they can just eyeball it and say, these are the 4 best teams in the country, then they should be able to seed them correctly. But they've never done that. They've never been able to select the best team. If the number 1 seed, if they're making a distinction between the 4 seed and the 5 seed and leaving the 5 seed out of the playoffs, that means they're correctly placing the 1, 2, 3, and 4 seeds. But the 1 seed has never won the championship. Therefore, they've incorrectly seeded those 4 teams, so they haven't even selected correctly.
But it's like March Madness, like one seeds get upsets, and I feel upsets are like a part of sports. And
absolutely,
the one maybe the 4 seeds was just better than the 1 seeds.
That means they misselected. They didn't select correctly.
I mean, but I don't see how you could say that. I mean, they're the number 1 team and the best team in the country, but they're also playing They're also playing another good team that was one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah. So what's this? So what's to say the team that the College Football Playoff Selection Committee said is number 5 shouldn't be in the top 4? It's the same argument.
Who is number 5? Ohio State, right?
Yeah.
Now, they lost. All right. They got these. You guys got destroyed by Iowa. Destroyed.
Yeah.
Now,
I thought it was about winning games. Is it about winning games or losing games? Alabama didn't win the games Ohio State won. They didn't even come close to the same resume as Ohio State. They didn't beat a top 10 Wisconsin team. They didn't beat a top 10 Penn State team. They didn't beat a top 15 Michigan State team. They didn't have that resume.
But what was their margin of victory, though? Were they barely beating these teams, or were they destroying these teams?
Ohio State destroyed a bunch of teams too. Okay. The last point I'll make on this topic, and I'll let you then talk, is that I have no issue. Well, I do have an issue because I'm selecting conference champions is the way I would do it. But in this comparison of 2 teams, Ohio State and Alabama last year, again, let's make one point clear. I'm not about selecting the best teams. I don't know who the best teams are until they play. I don't know who the best teams are. I am about selecting the teams with the best resume that won conference championships. Therefore, Alabama is automatically eliminated because they couldn't even win their own conference. So they're eliminated. So basically what I'm doing at that point is I'm selecting the 4 out of the 5 conferences, which is idiotic anyway, but that's what I'm forced to do. So I'm basically eliminating one conference champion, and that would be USC because they didn't have a good enough resume. The point, so the point I will make about the Iowa game is I have, under this criteria, I have absolutely no issue with anyone who made the argument, and rightfully so, that Ohio State looked awful in one game against Iowa. They went to Iowa, they lost by 31 points. That is an awful, awful loss. Okay, we heard that for weeks leading up to the selection committee. And then once it was argued, we heard it for the next week, people arguing on both sides. And that was the one game and the one score that everybody in the nation that cared a damn about college football, everybody knew that one game. Isn't that the one game that everybody talked about more than any other game? You would agree with that. That's what we heard. Just it was 24/7. Ohio State lost to Iowa. They lost by 31 points. And I get it. That should be a huge penalty against Ohio State. The only thing I asked for, and I think the only place that anyone ever heard that would have been on this channel, was that if you're going to credit or discredit Ohio State for being blown out against Iowa, then you also have to credit Ohio State for blowing out a top 15 Michigan State team 48-3. They destroyed Michigan State, who finished in the top 15 in the country. Did Alabama have a win like that? No, they slipped by Mississippi State and LSU. Those were their 2 best wins that were unimpressive. They did not have, like Alabama did not have an Iowa loss. They also did not have a Michigan State 48-3 win. That didn't exist on their resume, but I never heard anybody make that statement to balance out the argument, except for me.
That's a good point, but I got an also good point too. So at that moment,
okay,
Ohio State was fully healthy when you guys played Iowa, right?
Yeah, as healthy as teams are after 8 or 9 games, sure.
Alabama barely beat these teams, with most of their star players being out and being injured. And it was so bad to the point, Dylan Moses was their best linebacker, because when they went to that Auburn game, they were banged up on the defense side of it. They were really, really banged up. That's why Dylan Moses was starting, because really Dylan Moses didn't really get in like that. So they were really, really banged up. And if they were fully healthy, they would have beaten that Auburn team.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know what would have happened. You can't say that.
But they weren't fully healthy though, and it was you guys lost
to
an Iowa team that didn't finish ranked, but they lost to an Auburn team that ended up ending the season that was a pretty good team, and it was ranked.
Auburn ended up with how many losses? I'm holding up my fingers right now. I got it. This is how 4. Auburn lost 4 games. Iowa lost 5 games. So I don't care about the rankings. The rankings, that brings us back to a bunch of humans saying how good teams are. They played fairly comparable schedules, and Iowa lost 5 times and Auburn lost 4 times. I don't know that there was a whole huge difference between those two, especially since, they both went on the road and played those games. So, you know what? Yes, Alabama had injuries to its linebacker core. They were ravaged by injuries in the linebacking core. Okay. Can you imagine a team that lost its first and second team quarterbacks winning a national championship? Now what if that team, can you imagine that happening? No, you'd have to leave that team out of the playoff. You'd have to leave them out of the playoff, because you'd be like, they don't have a chance. They're third stringer. This guy hasn't even thrown a freaking pass. We don't know.
I knew you was going to bring that up, but I feel you should take injuries into the equation. And if I feel like you're getting a good player, that should also impact your ability to get into the college football play, because the committee. I'm just going based on the committee's logic and defending the committee. So if the committee feels that when they get this player back or get these certain group of players back, and those players come back and they got a week to recuperate, if the committee feels those players are what makes that team the best team or one of the best 4 teams in the nation, then I agree with it. I'm just defending their logic here. Now, everybody else's logic sounds a little bit better, but I really like the 4-team college football playoffs, because I don't think
you want a group of 5 team to be in, and you're going to leave out another conference champion and maybe Notre Dame.
It has to be controversial. Now, Notre Dame, without a doubt, if Notre Dame
8 teams
this year, if Notre Dame wins this year and they win out, they're going to be in the college football playoffs. It can't be no debate, can't be no discussion. I don't want to hear anything about they did make it to a conference championship, because they beat Michigan. They beat down Stanford, literally beat down Stanford. I mean,
okay.
And they played Virginia Tech. At Virginia Tech.
Okay, Big Poppy, I'm going to give you a scenario, and you tell me who makes the playoff. Ohio State goes undefeated. Clemson goes undefeated. Alabama goes undefeated, beats Georgia, who loses 1 game by a field goal in the SEC title game. Oklahoma goes undefeated. Notre Dame goes undefeated. Who are you going to put in the playoff?
That's a tough one. So first, I'm going to put Alabama there because Georgia was undefeated. Georgia was
sure.
All right, I'm putting Alabama is definitely going to be in because Alabama.
Because it's Alabama.
There would be an LSU, Auburn, and Georgia.
Yep.
3 top 10 teams. So
I guess
they would have had no choice but to be there. So number 2, Clemson. I'm gonna put Clemson onto the back burner. The back burner for now.
All right.
So the next team you said was Ohio State. You have to put Ohio State in there because Ohio State beat Penn State. I don't know if you could still count the TCU win, but I'm not going to count that. I'm going to take in the Michigan State because I believe Michigan State is running. Well, they're actually pretty good.
You're assuming. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, Big Papi, but when it came to Alabama, you assumed that LSU and Auburn were going to complete really good seasons. You didn't make the same assumption with TCU. They've lost what, 2 games? Why won't TCU be 10-2?
But TCU,
you just go ahead. Go ahead. I just thought it was amusing that you were assuming that Alabama would have this great resume because Auburn and LSU were just going to continue winning, but TCU might weight down Ohio State's schedule. Even though that schedule would include Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, and probably Wisconsin.
But the strength of schedule, Wisconsin lost to. Didn't Wisconsin lose to BYU?
Yeah, they did.
And that BYU team isn't even good. They got beat down by Washington.
Okay.
And Auburn beat Washington.
Clemson lost to Syracuse last year.
Without the starting quarterback, though.
Now, he played most of the game.
But in the key moment when he was there, when he wasn't there, they lost.
Syracuse was awful, though. And they lost to Pitt the year before, team that lost 5 games. So you know, 1 game. If Wisconsin's running around losing to Minnesota and Illinois and they still go to the Big Ten championship game, sure, I will take your point. But if Wisconsin runs the table or plays extremely well and finishes, let's say, 10-2, I think that's a quality win. Now, if they slop around and they barely win the Big Ten West and they're 8-4 and they lost to some bad teams, sure, I would not credit that as some kind of great win. All right, go ahead. I think you're putting Ohio State in.
I'm putting Ohio State in.
Okay.
They're going to be. So you said the scenario was all these teams are undefeated.
Yep.
So that means they had to beat Michigan.
I'm not saying this is easy. Just go ahead. It's just a scenario.
They had to. So that means they had to beat Michigan. They beat Michigan State. They beat Penn State. They beat Wisconsin. So you have to put them in. You said Oklahoma. The last 2 teams are probably going to be the hardest to do because Oklahoma is playing Texas and so I skipped Clemson. I skipped Oklahoma. What were the other teams? You said Notre Dame, right?
So I was basically just getting you down to a place where you would have to make a determination between Notre Dame and a conference champion.
I would definitely put Notre Dame at number 3.
Okay.
I'll put Notre Dame at number 3, and that means number 4. So at this point for the number 4 spot, in my mind, I'm going by who had the toughest strength of schedule at this point, and who was the better opponents that they faced and that they beat down. Clemson, just using my logic, and they're 12-0, so I have to figure that they played my Hurricanes in the ACC championship. But Miami, our best win, if we got to the ACC championship, would most likely be Boston College. But what was the other team?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma's best win.
So
I'm trying to decide, would it be Texas or would it be Oklahoma State?
Or West Virginia or TCU, and then having beaten one of those teams twice.
You said West Virginia. All right. I'm putting Oklahoma in at number 4.
Okay. So Clemson gets left out. Clemson doesn't make the playoff. And Central Florida, if they go undefeated, they don't make the playoff. You've got Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Oklahoma. So you don't think there should be an 8-team playoff?
No, I feel those were the best four. Those are the best four teams.
Okay.
And UCF didn't. They haven't played nobody good in their nobody in their conference this year is good at all. So I just feel that's just bad luck for them.
Weren't you just telling me that the American Conference is like another Power 5 conference?
Yes, but not this year. Well,
well, we can't change the rules. We shouldn't be changing the rules every year.
So I say we got to.
You need an 18 playoff is what you need.
But I feel.
What's wrong with an 18 playoff? Why are you so against an 18 playoff? You put in.
It's more games. It's more games for the players, and these players are already trying to protect their injuries, their draft stocks. They're already saying.
Okay, how many playoff games are there right now?
2.
Well, there's 3 with the championship game. Okay.
All right.
So if we went to 8, there would be how many games? I'll do the.
Be either 5 or 6 more games.
I'll do the math. There'd be 4 more games. There'd be 7 games. There'd be 4 in the first round, 2 in the second round, the championship game. That's 7 games. So there's 130 teams playing major college football, and they all play 12 or 13 games. There are roughly 1,500 college football games every year, and I want to add 4. I want to add 4 games to 1,500, and you're telling me that we're going to add way too many games. But I want to add the integrity of representing every conference and representing the group of 5. Or the group of 5, they shouldn't even play football. I have said this a number of times, and I'll say it one more time and probably another 100 times at some point, that I would, if I was in charge, I would force a representative of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee to go to every camp of every group of 5 program during August while those kids are out there during two-a-days. And I would hold a meeting with the team and say, if you win every game by 50 points this year, you still have no chance of making the college football playoff. So I just want to let you know that and have a great season. We'll see you. You either need to have the group of 5 play its own championship, or you need to include them in some fashion. Central Florida couldn't have done anything more than what they did last year. Give them a spot or leave them out and tell them you're not going to make it. Don't give them some kind of an illusion that they can make it.
You got a point there. You got a point. But the 8 team is just too many games.
We've added 4 games to 1,500.
Okay, so with the 18 college football playoffs, it's going to be 8 teams, but then it's going to be 4 more teams who you could argue say they deserve to be inside that 18 playoffs.
Okay, you're missing the reason we went to 8. So yes, you could go to 32 teams, and you could always make an argument. Well, shouldn't this team have been in instead of that? You could always make that argument. We could have one team. Why don't we just name the national champion? We'll have no games. We'll just say they're the national champion. We could do it a bunch of different ways. We had a BCS where we picked 2 teams, and there was always an argument over, well, they could have been in instead. So there's always going to be an argument. But this is the beauty of going from 4 to 8, is now we can represent. We can at least represent every conference. We can't do that now. At least we can represent every conference. So no conference can say, why did we get left out? They're not going to get left out.
So what if the conference champion of that team was the 8-4 team? Will they still get in?
I'm sorry, repeat that again.
What if, say you have a conference like the Pac-12.
Yes.
Every team in there is average. And
I don't care. They won the Pac-12. We're not leaving the AFC West division leader out of the NFL playoffs.
So it could be an 8-4 team, and you would put them in the college football playoffs.
Absolutely.
But they're not. Okay, so I get what yours is. You want to reward the teams for winning their conference. You want there to be value for winning the conference championship, correct?
Yes, you got it. Let's also understand this. Unlike the NFL would actually have more right in saying at the end of a regular season, you know what, we're going to change our rules real quick. The AFC West is horrible. Denver just won. They went 9-7. We're going to keep them out because somebody else went 10-6, and we're going to make them a wild card. They would have more right to do that because all those teams play each other. But if, let's say, the Pac-12 champion does go 8-4, let's say USC, they're sitting with 2 losses right now. They lose 2 more games. They go to the Pac-12 championship game. They upset Washington. They're 8-4. Well, they'd be 9-4 with the championship win. So they're 9-4. Okay, they lost to Texas, and they lost to Notre Dame outside of the conference. But basically, after winning a conference championship, that team that wins a conference championship, there has been very little exposure that they've had to anyone else in the country to prove that they can't beat other teams in the country. If you follow me, these teams play in such silos and are so separated in their own conferences, they only play generally one decent team in another conference. So there's little to go by. So all that 8-4 is telling us within the Pac-12 is that those teams beat up on each other. So you can spin that any way you want. You can say, well, that conference is really mediocre because they all beat each other. Or you could say that conference is really strong because there are no bad teams. They're all beating up on each other. You can spin whatever narrative. Every conference goes 500 within the conference. You follow me? Every conference has the same record inside the conference.
Okay, so I'm starting to be swayed. I'm starting to be a little bit swayed. You got me persuaded on the first part of your 18 college football playoff. So 14 automatic bids for the 4 conference champions, right?
And that's how I would do it, Big Poppy. I would even be open because in my system, let's say we go 5 conference champions, 2 wild cards, and a group of 5. The best group of 5. Let's say that's our formula. I would even be open to saying a conference champion has to have a certain record. And if you want to put that at 9-3 and kick out an 8-4 conference champion, especially if they lost out of conference games, I'd be willing to negotiate that one. Yeah, if somebody wins the Pac-12, they're 8-4, then they go 9-4. Especially if they lost non-conference games, because that's showing that they can't beat teams in the other conferences. If they lost all 4 of those games in the conference, then I would just be like, well, that conference could be really good. If USC goes out, let's say not this year, but in some other year, they beat, let's say this is another year, but it's the same schedule that they had this year. Let's say they beat Texas, they beat Notre Dame, but then in the Pac-12, they go 5-4, and there's a log jam at first place in their division, and they get to go to the Pac-12 title game, and they win. So they're 9-4, but they went 5-4 in the Pac-12, and they beat Notre Dame and Texas. All that showed us is that the Pac-12 must be really balanced. So I would love to keep all the conference champions, but I would be open to having a record criteria of, let's say, 9-3. Let's say.
So it's 5 Power 5 conferences. Conference championship winner automatically gets in unless they're not 9-4. So let's just say all these teams have won more than 9 games. So that means those 5 teams are automatically in. So that means we have 3 spots left. You got to include a group of 5 teams, the best group of 5 teams.
Absolutely.
So that means there'll be 2 spots left.
Yep.
So what would be the other 2 teams that get put in there?
Well, I would go back to your selection committee. I have no issue with that point because at least we've represented all the conferences. So we could go selection committee, or we can go some kind of BCS formula. That would be fine. Or you could take the 2 best. You could have the 2 best records out of all the second place teams And I'm sure there would be some kind of tie, so you would need some kind of tie-breaking system. That could be a BCS formula or the selection committee. I'll leave the selection committee play a part in this because I've already assured that all the conferences are represented. So I'm happy. So if this was
the seeding?
So think about this. If this was last year, who's making it? Georgia, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Clemson, USC. They're the champions. Alabama's an obvious choice with one loss. And Wisconsin makes a slot because they only lost one game. They went 13-1, and there's nobody else. And UCF. And nobody else is even comparable to Alabama and Wisconsin. They all lost 3 or more games.
How would the seeding work?
You can do the seedings however you want. I think that the wild card should get less consideration, but I'm not that concerned with seedings. Sure.
So basically, the seeding through 1 through 5, they'll have to choose the number. Are you just saying we're just going to? So the 1 through 5, you're going to have to seed them in order. So how would they seed them in order if those 5 teams have the same record?
Yeah, we'd have to think that one over. I don't know. You can go strength of schedule. Let's see. Let's look at last year. What happened last year? Georgia had a loss. Ohio State had 2. Oklahoma had 1. Clemson had 1. USC had 2. So automatically I'm thinking Ohio State and USC get pushed to the bottom. And you'd have to determine between Georgia, Clemson, and Oklahoma who had the best strength of schedule. And seed them 1, 2. Yep, go ahead.
I kind of feel that's kind of like the same thing with the current format right now with the 1 through 4 teams. So if those 5 teams were all 12-0, and just like how we would have 4 12-0 teams in the college football playoffs, we'll still be trying to figure out who would be the best teams and seeding. They're already in, but who would be the best teams and seeding them in order? And it's going to have to come down to. It's going to be.
I just said strength of schedule. I just said strength of schedule. There you go. We're done. I'm not that concerned about the seedings. I want to get fair representation in the playoff field. The seedings, we've seen what's happened with seedings for 4 straight years. It doesn't matter. It matters, obviously, because of matchups, but we've seen where the number 1 team doesn't even win the thing. So
you got me persuaded. Guys, I wonder what's going on. You got me persuaded. You got me persuaded. Really, mainly because I'm not really concerned about you. Basically, you want the conference championship to have value, and you're including the group of Power 5 schools, right?
Yep.
Now, what if we have 2 good group of 5 schools that are both undefeated? Would they have to have a playing game?
That would be interesting, huh? That would be interesting. Well, I like you, regardless of my argument about only playing a measly 4 more games out of 1,500. That's a drop in the ocean. I don't want these teams to have to play-in games, and there'd have to be some kind of distinguishing factor. And unfortunately, you got 5 conferences that we both know, even within the group of 5, there's a huge disparity between the Sun Belt and the American Conference.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But the Sun Belt teams never are vying this. You know why? Because they're not that good, and they play these loaded non-conference schedules where they play a bunch of SEC teams and they get killed. So, that's why the winner of the Sun Belt's usually like 8-4.
But the thing about it is they had the opportunity to beat those teams, though. So really, they had the opportunity to beat those teams.
Yeah.
So they can't say they did. So they can't have the same argument that the UCF had last year or people used against UCF, the schedule wasn't strong enough. So I'm not worried about them. They had those teams on the schedule, and if they really wanted to get in, they should have beaten those teams because it's still about winning. UCF was unlucky because that's what they was used against them. But the Sun Belt teams, they have a chance to get in if they beat those teams.
Yeah, I'm not that concerned with it. You really don't want to hear my other.
I mean, I wouldn't feel no pity for them. I mean,
football's
football.
You really don't want to hear my other playoff format. So I would either do it that way, or we've got 10 conferences, right? We got the power. Hang on, we got the Power 5 and the Group of 5. All 10 conference champions get in. This is NCAA tournament style. All 10 conference champions make it. And then we go with 6 wild cards, which all would most likely come from the Power 5 because those would be the 6 best teams. And you got a 16-team playoff. And the beauty in that is that you have a true national champion because you're not underrepresenting all these other conferences. These other conferences, basically, the Group of 5 should go play their own championship.
I was thinking that they need to have a Group of 5. I really don't see the point of having these New Year's 6 bowl games. I just figure wouldn't it just make more sense to have two different playoffs, basically? Because you know how March Madness, for the teams that don't have March Madness, they have the NIT tournament, basically. I really don't see the point because, I really don't see the point of a New Year's 6 Bowls game. Give those games meaning.
Money.
Because the reason why, give them meaning, so make it another playoff.
Oh, okay, I got you. But not as many people are going to watch the Group of 5 playoff as watch Auburn play Wisconsin in a bowl game.
Yeah, I guess not everybody's like me and you, Mark. Whenever there's a football game on, we watch it.
Well, that is true. But given Auburn and Wisconsin playing in a bowl game against Memphis and Colorado State playing, I'm going to watch Auburn and Wisconsin, even if it's a meaningless bowl game. So the beauty of the college basketball tournament is, and you know this better than I do because I stopped watching college basketball a long time ago, but I've certainly watched a ton of games in my lifetime, is that those 64 teams, and now it's 68, those are not the 68 best teams in the country. That's probably, wouldn't you think that that's probably like the 40 or 45 best teams in the country? And then there's a big drop off because they have to take the conference champions from those little leagues. So you may be 7th place in the Big Ten and you're really one of the 68 best teams in the country, but you didn't make it. So this would be almost similar if you took the 10 champions, because you'd have the 5 Power 5s and then you'd have the 6 wild cards. So you'd have probably the 11 best teams in the country. Then you'd have this big drop off to like the 55th best team in the country or the 62nd best team in the country. And they would make it because they won the Sun Belt or the MAC or whatever. And that would be the beauty in it, is that in the first round, you'd have Alabama play, Louisiana Monroe or whoever won the Sun Belt, Arkansas State. And then you'd have Ohio State play, they play the MAC champion. They'd play Ohio U or Toledo. There you go. And what would happen? Those first round games, like 3 of them would be horrible. They'd be 55-7. And the other games would be great because you'd have like the ACC champion playing, a wild card from the Power 5. So they might be playing LSU. You could have like a Clemson LSU first round game. So like a couple of the first round games would be amazing, but a few would be complete annihilations. But what would be interesting is every so often, just like a 116 or a 215 in the NCAA tournament, you'd have Ohio State struggling with Troy in the fourth quarter, 24-20. And every so often we'd be shocked and we'd be on the seat of our pants, edge of our seat, I should say. I guess we would be on the seat of our pants, edge of our seat after you've been talking for 3 hours. It gets all jumbled up. But we'd have those kind of situations every once in a while, maybe every 5 or 6 years.
I like that. I like that playoff. I prefer that playoff better if it wasn't a problem with the games. I feel they could probably shrink the regular season. Nah. If they did that, they would shrink the. I'd rather see that than a 4-team or 8-team playoff. I'd rather see the 10-team playoff. I would rather see that one. Or the 16-team playoff, I mean.
All right, Big Poppy. Good discussion. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed
it too. I was very eager to have this with you. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely, Big Poppy. I appreciate it. Thanks for the support.
No problem.
You have a good night.
You too.
All right, Big Poppy. Man, we grinded that thing down, didn't we? College football playoff. I thought that was a conversation for sometime in the off season. I thought we had too many games to talk about, but we can always argue about the college football playoff and the ridiculous system that was set up with 5 conferences and 4 spots. They certainly didn't bring the mathematician into the room, did they? When they came up with this playoff system. Let's see, we got 5 conferences. Yeah, we'll do 4 spots. Let's do that. Okay, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, will be back here tomorrow night, Thursday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. I'm going to urge you and encourage you to grab one of the Amazon links. If you do any shopping at Amazon, you or anyone in your household, that will support the channel. Also, the newsletter. So if you are unsure about the newsletter, grab somebody on the live chat that subscribes to the newsletter and ask them how they like it. Then send your email to MarkRogersTV@gmail.com. Just leave your email at MarkRogersTV@gmail.com. We'll get the newsletter out to you each and every Monday. Also, we'll be back again Thursday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time to talk college football. And forget who we've got playing tomorrow night. We may talk about those games as well. I think there are some group of 5 games because our one Power 5 matchup outside of the Saturday window is Georgia Tech and Louisville, a matchup of very disappointing teams here in the ACC on Friday night. Of course, I'll have my picks released later this week. Don't forget the 11:45 a.m. Eastern time live stream on Friday with Steve Merrill from Pro Sports Info. I'll also be predicting and previewing the games. Some of those are going to be released here at Mark Rogers TV. Others, including the first release of Notre Dame Virginia Tech preview and prediction at SG1 Sports. Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher for the audio. And you guys know that you help me tremendously by liking, commenting, and of course, our subscriber list, our number of subscribers for some reason is stalled, is just flattened out at 56, whatever it's at. So I was hoping to do much better than that, but I appreciate the faithfulness that you guys have shown in the live streams and in the chats. And if you like any particular video, you can also share that on social media as well. I will see you guys next time. I appreciate it so much. And yes, we are in the process of ordering Miami and Oklahoma helmets and who knows who else right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I will see you all back here at 7 o'clock Eastern time on Thursday.